the rainforest-growing economic system for extreme sustainability and global harmony and to terraform new worlds. A rainforest-growing economic system is an economy designed to function like a living rainforest. It continuously captures energy from sunlight, cycles nutrients, builds complexity, increases biodiversity, and produces abundance without depletion. Such a system can achieve extreme sustainability, global harmony, and even planetary terraforming. Below is a comprehensive, structured explanation aligned with your long-term interest in regenerative civilization, permaculture, carbon capture, and ecological engineering. Core principle: the rainforest as an economic operating system. A rainforest is not just a biome, it is a self-optimizing production system. Its defining features become the foundations of the economy: solar-powered productivity, photosynthesis as primary energy, closed-loop material cycles, no waste, only nutrients, diversity-driven resilience, millions of species performing complementary roles, distributed ownership, no single point of failure, net climate repair, carbon sequestration, rainfall generation, cooling. A rainforest economy replaces extractive capitalism with regenerative abundance economics. How a rainforest-growing economy works on Earth. Photosynthetic production as the base industry. Instead of fossil fuels and linear manufacturing, the primary industries become agroforestry and food forests, timber-free biomaterials, bamboo, hemp, mycelium, algae, lignin-based composites, carbon-negative construction, engineered wood, biochar concrete, living buildings, photosynthetic fuels, algae biofuels, artificial photosynthesis, solar hydrogen. Every hectare becomes a multi-layered factory producing food, materials, medicine, energy, and ecosystem services. Multi-layer economic zoning, rainforest structure. Rainforests grow in vertical layers. Economies can do the same. Rainforest layer economic function: canopy timber alternatives, carbon capture, climate regulation subcanopy fruit, nuts, latex, fibers, oil shrub layer medicinal plants, spices, chemicals ground layer staple foods, soil builders root layer carbon storage, mineral cycling fungal layer waste recycling, soil intelligence. Each layer supports multiple industries on the same land, multiplying productivity without expansion. Waste equals feedstock economy. In rainforest systems, CO2 biomass, organic waste soil, heat growth, byproducts inputs for other organisms, human analogs. Cities feed organic waste into bioreactors and soil regeneration systems. Industrial CO2 is fed to algae farms. Wastewater becomes nutrient-rich irrigation. Plastics replaced by biodegradable biopolymers. This creates near-zero waste civilization. Economic incentives aligned with life. Regenerative value metrics. Money is no longer tied only to extraction or consumption but to carbon sequestered, biodiversity increased, water cycled, soil regenerated, human well-being improved. This can be implemented through carbon-negative currencies, ecosystem service credits, bioregional accounting, proof of regeneration ledgers. Profit becomes a measure of life created, not resources destroyed. Global harmony through bioregional cooperation. Rainforest economies are local in production, global in knowledge, cooperative rather than competitive. Nations specialize in bioregional strengths instead of resource exploitation. Tropical regions, biodiversity and carbon drawdown. Temperate regions, food forests and timber alternatives. Arid regions, solar, algae, desert greening. Polar regions, data, research, atmospheric engineering. This reduces conflict by eliminating resource scarcity. Scaling to planetary terraforming. Terraforming is simply regenerative ecology at planetary scale. Phase 1, pre-terraforming, life infrastructure. Before trees, microbes, algae, lichens, cyanobacteria, soil creation via biochar, mineral weathering bacteria, mycorrhizal networks, atmospheric engineering, CO2 capture, oxygen release, methane control. These organisms build soil, regulate atmosphere, stabilize temperatures. This mirrors early Earth. Phase 2, pioneer forests and climate control. Once conditions allow, fast-growing, nitrogen-fixing plants, artificial rainfall generation via vegetation, darkening surfaces to absorb heat, cloud seeding through biogenic aerosols. Forests become climate machines, not just vegetation. Phase 3, full rainforest biospheres. Eventually, closed-loop biospheres, self-sustaining hydrological cycles, autonomous ecosystem expansion, human habitats embedded in forests. Cities become forest nodes, not concrete sprawls. Space colonies as rainforests, not factories. On Mars, moons, or exoplanets, habitats are sealed rainforest domes. Economy based on photosynthesis, biomaterials, biomanufacturing, waste to nutrient loops. Humans become gardeners of planets. No mining first model, life builds the infrastructure. Technology that enables this system. Key enablers: artificial photosynthesis, carbon mineralization, synthetic biology, AI-managed ecosystems, nanotechnology for nutrient delivery, mycelium-based construction, genetic libraries for planetary adaptation. Technology does not dominate nature, it amplifies it. Social and cultural transformation. A rainforest economy requires a new worldview, humans as keystone species, education centered on ecology, systems thinking, and stewardship, work as ecosystem participation, wealth as planetary health, progress as increasing complexity and harmony, a living, expanding civilization. The result is a carbon negative, biodiversity positive Earth, an economy that grows forests faster than it grows consumption, no wars over resources, self-repairing cities. Terraforming as a peaceful, life-creating act. In this model, humanity does not conquer planets, it invites them to live. A rainforest-growing economic system is an economic model that deliberately imitates the structure, function, and evolutionary logic of a natural rainforest. A rainforest is one of the most productive and stable systems on Earth because it operates entirely on renewable energy from sunlight, cycles nearly all materials internally, increases complexity over time, and becomes more resilient as it grows. Translating this logic into an economic system means designing human production, trade, cities, and technologies so that they behave like living ecosystems rather than extractive machines. At the foundation of this system is the recognition that sunlight, carbon dioxide, water, and minerals are the true primary resources of any long-term civilization. In a rainforest-growing economy, photosynthesis becomes the central engine of production. Plants, algae, and photosynthetic microorganisms capture solar energy and convert atmospheric carbon into food, fibers, fuels, construction materials, medicines, and industrial feedstocks. This replaces fossil-based extraction with continuous biological regeneration. Instead of depleting finite resources, the economy expands by growing living systems that become more productive each year. Unlike conventional monoculture agriculture or single-purpose industries, rainforest systems are vertically layered and multifunctional. Tall trees form a canopy that captures sunlight, stabilizes climate, and stores carbon. Beneath them, smaller trees and shrubs produce fruits, nuts, oils, resins, latex, and medicinal compounds. Ground-level plants produce staple foods, nitrogen-fixing biomass, and soil-building organic matter. Root systems stabilize land and cycle minerals, while fungi and microbes decompose waste and redistribute nutrients. When this structure is applied to the economy, the same land or infrastructure simultaneously produces food, materials, energy, climate regulation, and biodiversity. Productivity increases without expanding land use, eliminating the pressure that drives deforestation and ecological collapse. A rainforest-growing economic system also eliminates the concept of waste. In natural ecosystems, all byproducts become inputs for other processes. Dead plant matter becomes soil, carbon dioxide becomes new biomass, and excess heat drives biological activity rather than pollution. Human systems can replicate this by designing industries where organic waste becomes compost or biochar, industrial carbon emissions feed algae or mineralization systems, wastewater becomes nutrient-rich irrigation, and discarded materials are biodegradable or endlessly recyclable. This transforms cities and industries into closed-loop metabolic systems that behave like living organisms rather than pollution sources. Economic value in this system is fundamentally redefined. Instead of measuring success through short-term profit, gross extraction, or consumption volume, value is measured by regenerative outcomes. Economic activity is rewarded for increasing soil fertility, sequestering carbon, restoring biodiversity, purifying water, stabilizing climate, and improving human well-being. Financial systems can reflect this by tying currency creation, investment returns, and trade incentives to measurable ecological regeneration. Wealth becomes directly linked to planetary health, aligning human self-interest with environmental restoration. This alignment creates the foundation for global harmony. Many conflicts arise from resource scarcity, environmental degradation, and unequal access to necessities. A A rainforest-growing economy reduces scarcity by producing abundance locally and sustainably. Because most production is based on sunlight and biological growth rather than rare extractive resources, dependence on geopolitical control of minerals, oil, and land decreases. Regions specialize according to their ecological strengths rather than competing for domination. Knowledge, genetic libraries, and ecological design principles are shared globally. While production remains bioregional, cooperation becomes more rational than conflict because ecosystems improve when connected rather than isolated. As this system scales up, it naturally becomes a planetary regeneration mechanism. Large-scale reforestation, agroforestry, wetland restoration, and oceanic algae cultivation alter atmospheric chemistry by drawing down carbon dioxide and increasing oxygen. Vegetation influences cloud formation, rainfall patterns, and surface temperatures, creating feedback loops that stabilize climate. Soil restoration increases water retention and drought resistance. Over time, deserts green, biodiversity returns, and the planet moves toward a stable, high life state similar to Earth's most productive ecological periods. Terraforming Earth, in this sense, is not science fiction but the deliberate acceleration of natural planetary healing processes. The same principles extend beyond Earth to the terraforming of new worlds. Terraforming is fundamentally an ecological process, not an industrial one. Before trees or animals can exist on another planet, microbial life and simple photosynthetic organisms must prepare the environment. Engineered algae, bacteria, and fungi can begin building soil, fixing carbon and nitrogen, regulating atmospheric gases, and moderating temperature. These pioneer organisms slowly transform barren landscapes into biologically active systems, just as life did on early Earth. As conditions stabilize, more complex plants can be introduced to establish pioneer forests. These early forests further thicken the atmosphere, generate oxygen, increase humidity, and initiate rainfall cycles. Over time, fully self-sustaining ecosystems emerge, capable of expanding without constant human intervention. Human settlements within these worlds are not isolated machines but integrated forest habitats, where buildings are grown from biological materials, energy comes from photosynthesis and solar systems, and waste is continuously recycled into living systems. In space habitats, moons, or sealed planetary domes, rainforest-growing economies become essential for survival. Closed-loop ecosystems provide food, air, water purification, materials, and psychological well-being. These habitats function as miniature planets, teaching humanity how to manage life support systems at planetary scale. Rather than conquering space through extraction and mechanical domination, humanity becomes a cultivator of life, spreading ecosystems rather than exploitation. Ultimately, a rainforest-growing economic system represents a civilizational shift in identity. Humans cease to view themselves as separate from nature and instead recognize themselves as a keystone species capable of enhancing planetary systems. Technology becomes a tool for accelerating natural processes rather than overriding them. Progress is measured by increasing ecological complexity, resilience, and harmony rather than consumption or domination. In its mature form, this system produces a living Earth that continually regenerates itself, a peaceful global civilization rooted in cooperation rather than scarcity, and the ability to transform lifeless worlds into thriving ecosystems. It is not merely an economic model but a blueprint for a long-lived, interplanetary, life-creating civilization that grows forests wherever it goes and leaves every world more alive than it found it. A rainforest-growing economic system, a blueprint for extreme sustainability, global harmony, and planetary terraforming. Human civilization stands at a pivotal moment in its evolutionary trajectory. Industrial systems built on extraction, fossil fuels, and linear consumption have delivered unprecedented material wealth, yet they have also destabilized Earth's climate, degraded ecosystems, and intensified global inequality and conflict. To move beyond these limits, humanity must adopt an economic system that does not merely reduce harm but actively restores the biosphere. A rainforest-growing economic system offers such a pathway. By modeling human economies on the structure and function of natural rainforests, this system enables extreme sustainability, fosters global harmony, and provides a realistic framework for terraforming new worlds. Rainforests represent one of the most productive and resilient systems known in nature. They operate almost entirely on renewable solar energy, recycle nearly all materials internally, and increase their complexity and stability over time. Unlike industrial systems that degrade with use, rainforests improve as they grow. A rainforest-growing economic system translates these ecological principles into human production and governance, transforming the economy from a mechanism of extraction into a living, regenerative system. At the core of this economic model is photosynthesis as the primary engine of value creation. Sunlight, carbon dioxide, water, and minerals become the fundamental inputs of production. Plants, algae, and photosynthetic microorganisms convert these inputs into food, fibers, fuels, medicines, construction materials, and industrial compounds. This biological manufacturing replaces fossil fuels and resource-intensive processes with continuous, renewable growth. Economic expansion no longer depends on depleting finite resources, but on increasing the health and productivity of living systems. A defining feature of rainforests is their vertical and functional diversity. Multiple layers of vegetation coexist in the same space, each performing complementary roles. When this structure is applied to economic design, land and infrastructure become multifunctional. Agroforestry systems produce staple crops, fruits, nuts, oils, and fibers simultaneously while improving soil fertility and capturing carbon. Urban environments integrate green roofs, vertical forests, algae bioreactors, and mycelium-based construction, transforming cities into productive ecosystems rather than centers of consumption. This layered productivity dramatically increases output per unit area while restoring ecological balance. Equally important is the rainforest principle that waste does not exist. In natural ecosystems, every byproduct becomes a resource for another organism. A rainforest-growing economy applies this logic by creating closed-loop industrial systems. Organic waste is composted or converted into biochar to build soil. Carbon emissions are captured and fed into algae cultivation or mineralized into stable carbon forms. Wastewater is purified through constructed wetlands and reused for irrigation. Synthetic materials are replaced with biodegradable or fully recyclable bio-based alternatives. As a result, pollution is eliminated not through restriction but through intelligent system design. This ecological foundation enables a profound redefinition of economic value. Traditional economies reward extraction, speed, and volume of consumption, often ignoring long-term environmental costs. In contrast, a rainforest-growing economic system measures success by regenerative outcomes. Economic activity is valued for its ability to increase biodiversity, sequester carbon, restore water cycles, regenerate soil, and enhance human health and social cohesion. Financial systems, currencies, and investment frameworks can be tied to these outcomes, ensuring that profit aligns with planetary restoration. Wealth becomes synonymous with the capacity to sustain life. The global implications of this shift are transformative. Many geopolitical conflicts stem from competition over scarce resources, degraded environments, and economic inequality. A rainforest-growing economy reduces these pressures by decentralizing production and increasing local self-sufficiency. Because most value is generated from sunlight and biological growth, dependence on oil, rare minerals, and extractive monopolies diminishes. Regions cooperate based on ecological strengths rather than competing for domination. Knowledge, ecological design, and genetic resources are shared globally, while production remains bioregional. This model encourages collaboration, reduces conflict, and promotes long-term global stability. As this economic system expands, it becomes a powerful mechanism for planetary regeneration. Large-scale reforestation, agroforestry, wetland restoration, and marine ecosystem cultivation actively reverse climate change by drawing down atmospheric carbon and restoring natural climate regulation processes. Vegetation influences rainfall patterns, cloud formation, and surface temperatures, creating positive feedback loops that stabilize the climate. Soil restoration improves water retention, reduces floods and droughts, and enhances food security. Over time, Earth transitions from a state of ecological overshoot to one of dynamic balance and abundance. The same principles that regenerate Earth can be extended to the terraforming of new worlds. Terraforming is fundamentally an ecological process driven by life, not machines. On barren planets or moons, the process begins with microorganisms such as algae, bacteria, and fungi. These pioneer species build soil, fix atmospheric gases, and regulate surface conditions. As the environment becomes more stable, increasingly complex plants can be introduced to form pioneer forests. These forests thicken the atmosphere, generate oxygen, regulate temperature, and initiate hydrological cycles. Over long timescales, self-sustaining ecosystems emerge, capable of supporting complex life. Human settlements on these worlds are designed as integrated ecological systems rather than isolated industrial outposts. Habitats are embedded within forests, constructed from biological materials, and powered by solar and photosynthetic energy systems. Waste is continuously recycled into nutrient cycles, and food, air, and water are produced locally. These settlements function as living laboratories, refining humanity's ability to manage closed-loop ecosystems at planetary scale. Beyond its technical and economic dimensions, a rainforest-growing economic system represents a cultural and philosophical transformation. It redefines humanity's role from conqueror of nature to steward and amplifier of life. Education focuses on ecological literacy, systems thinking, and long-term responsibility. Work becomes participation in ecosystem restoration and maintenance rather than alienated labor. Progress is measured by increasing harmony, resilience, and complexity rather than material throughput. A rainforest-growing economic system offers a comprehensive solution to humanity's greatest challenges. It provides a viable path to extreme sustainability, aligns economic incentives with ecological health, reduces global conflict, and enables the ethical terraforming of new worlds. By modeling civilization on the logic of living ecosystems, humanity can transition from a destructive phase of planetary exploitation to a mature phase of planetary and interplanetary stewardship. Such a civilization does not merely survive, it flourishes, leaving every world it touches more alive than before. How can we protect and grow forests as sustainable productions? Protecting and growing forests as sustainable production systems means designing them so they simultaneously regenerate ecosystems, support livelihoods, and continuously provide materials, food, energy, and services without degradation. This approach treats forests not as resources to be extracted, but as living production infrastructures that increase in value the longer they are maintained. Below is a comprehensive, complete explanation that integrates ecology, economics, technology, and governance. Redefining forests as living production systems. Forests must be understood as biological factories powered by sunlight. A healthy forest produces timber alternatives, food, medicine, fibers, resins, climate regulation, water purification, and biodiversity all at once. Protecting forests, therefore, is not about freezing them in time, but about managing them so their productive capacity increases without collapsing their ecological integrity. This requires moving away from clear-cutting and monoculture plantations toward continuous cover forestry, agroforestry, and mixed-species forest systems that mimic natural forest dynamics. Continuous cover and selective forestry instead of removing entire forest stands. Sustainable forest production relies on selective harvesting, where individual trees are removed at different ages and sizes. This preserves canopy cover, protects soil, maintains wildlife habitat, and allows the forest to regenerate naturally. Trees are harvested only after reaching ecological maturity, and the forest structure is maintained at all times. Younger trees, understory plants, and fungi continue growing uninterrupted, ensuring continuous productivity and carbon sequestration. Multi-layer forest production. Natural forests are vertically structured ecosystems. Sustainable forest production maximizes this structure. Canopy layer produces long-lived structural materials and carbon storage. Subcanopy layer produces fruits, nuts, latex, resins, oils, and medicines. Shrub and herb layers produce food crops, medicinal plants, spices, and fibers. Root and fungal layers stabilize soil, recycle nutrients, and enable tree growth. This layered production increases total yield per hectare while maintaining biodiversity and ecosystem resilience. Timber without deforestation. Wood can be produced sustainably if it is treated as a renewable structural carbon store, not a disposable material. Sustainable timber systems include harvesting only a small percentage of trees per year, prioritizing long-lived wood products such as buildings and infrastructure, using fast-growing species for short-lived products, replacing concrete and steel with engineered wood where appropriate. Each harvested tree is replaced naturally or assisted by planting, ensuring forest biomass and carbon stocks continue to grow. Expanding forest-based non-timber products. Forests can generate significant economic value without cutting trees through fruits, nuts, and seeds. Medicinal compounds and pharmaceuticals, resins, gums, oils, and latex, mushrooms and fungi, fibers and dyes, honey and pollination services. These non-timber forest products often provide higher long-term economic returns than logging while keeping forests intact. Forest regeneration and assisted natural recovery. Degraded forests can be restored through assisted natural regeneration, which protects young trees, controls invasive species, and reintroduces keystone species. This approach is often more effective and less costly than large-scale planting. Where planting is needed, diverse native species are used to rebuild functional ecosystems rather than monoculture plantations. Mycorrhizal fungi and soil microorganisms are restored to accelerate growth and resilience. Forests as climate and water infrastructure. Forests are critical climate-regulating systems. They cool the land, generate rainfall, stabilize weather patterns, and prevent floods and droughts. Sustainable forest production recognizes forests as infrastructure, equivalent in importance to energy grids or transportation systems. Protecting forests is therefore a form of climate adaptation and disaster prevention, reducing long-term economic costs. Community stewardship and indigenous knowledge. Long-term forest protection is strongest when local communities and indigenous peoples have secure land rights and economic incentives tied to forest health. Traditional ecological knowledge often reflects centuries of sustainable forest management. Community-managed forests consistently show lower deforestation rates and higher biodiversity than externally controlled areas. Empowering forest stewards aligns conservation with livelihoods. Economic incentives that reward forest growth. Forests must be more valuable standing than destroyed. This can be achieved by payments for ecosystem services, carbon, water, biodiversity, forest-based income diversification, regenerative forestry certification systems, carbon-negative construction markets, bioregional economic planning. When forest growth increases income, protection becomes economically rational. Technology as a support system, not a replacement. Modern tools enhance sustainable forest production when used carefully. Satellite and drone monitoring prevent illegal logging. AI models optimize harvest timing. Genetic diversity databases guide restoration. Bio-based materials reduce pressure on natural forests. Technology supports ecological processes rather than replacing them. Forest-integrated cities and industries. Urban and industrial systems must be redesigned to reduce pressure on forests by using alternative biomaterials, recycling wood products, growing urban forests for local production, integrating green corridors into infrastructure. Cities become partners of forests rather than drivers of deforestation. Long-term governance and cultural change. Sustainable forest production requires long-term thinking beyond election cycles and quarterly profits. Governance systems must protect forests as intergenerational assets. Education systems should teach ecological literacy and forest stewardship, cultivating a cultural identity in which forests are recognized as the foundation of civilization rather than obstacles to development. Protecting and growing forests as sustainable production systems is not a trade-off between ecology and economy. When forests are managed as living, regenerative systems, they produce more value over time while enhancing biodiversity, stabilizing climate, and supporting human well-being. By aligning economic incentives with forest growth and ecological health, humanity can transform forests into the backbone of a sustainable, peaceful, and resilient civilization. Protecting and growing forests as sustainable production systems requires a fundamental shift in how forests are understood, valued, and managed. Forests must be treated not as finite resources to be exploited, nor as static preserves to be isolated from human activity, but as living, productive ecosystems that can continuously generate ecological, economic, and social benefits when managed according to natural principles. A sustainable forest production system is one in which forest health, biodiversity, and productivity increase over time rather than decline. At the foundation of this approach is the recognition that forests are self-renewing systems powered by sunlight. Through photosynthesis, trees and other plants convert solar energy, carbon dioxide, water, and minerals into biomass that supports food webs, stores carbon, regulates climate, and provides materials useful to human societies. Protecting forests therefore means protecting the processes that allow this continuous regeneration to occur, including intact soil, stable hydrological cycles, diverse species interactions, and undisturbed canopy cover. Conventional forestry often damages these processes by relying on clear-cutting, monocultures, and short rotation cycles. In contrast, sustainable forest production relies on continuous cover forestry and selective harvesting. Individual trees are harvested at different stages of maturity while the overall forest structure remains intact. The canopy is preserved, soils are not exposed to erosion, and younger trees and understory plants continue to grow uninterrupted. This allows forests to keep sequestering carbon, supporting wildlife, and regulating local climates even while producing materials for human use. A key feature of sustainable forest production is biological diversity. Natural forests contain many species of trees, shrubs, herbs, fungi, and microorganisms, each playing a specific ecological role. Diverse forests are more productive over time because different species access different nutrients, resist pests and diseases more effectively, and respond differently to environmental stress. By maintaining mixed species forests rather than monoculture plantations, forest managers ensure long-term stability, resilience to climate change, and consistent yields without ecological collapse. Sustainable forest production also expands beyond timber alone. Forests can generate food, medicine, fibers, resins, oils, latex, mushrooms, honey, and many other non-timber products while remaining intact. These products often provide higher long-term economic value than logging because they can be harvested repeatedly without killing trees. By diversifying forest outputs, economic pressure to cut down entire forests is reduced, and livelihoods become directly dependent on keeping forests healthy. When timber is harvested, it must be done with the goal of maintaining or increasing total forest biomass. Trees are allowed to reach ecological maturity before removal, and harvesting rates remain below the forest's natural regrowth capacity. Wood is used primarily for long-lived products such as buildings and infrastructure, where it stores carbon for decades or centuries. Fast-growing species can supply short-lived products, while slower-growing species are reserved for structural uses, ensuring that forests remain net carbon sinks rather than sources of emissions. Restoring degraded forests is another essential component of sustainable production. Many damaged forests can recover naturally if protected from further disturbance. Assisted natural regeneration focuses on protecting young trees, controlling invasive species, restoring native seed sources, and rebuilding soil microbial communities. Where planting is necessary, diverse native species are used to re-establish functional ecosystems rather than simplified tree farms. Healthy soils, enriched with organic matter and mycorrhizal fungi, accelerate growth and improve long-term productivity. Forests must also be recognized as critical climate and water infrastructure. They regulate rainfall, reduce temperature extremes, prevent floods, stabilize slopes, and maintain fresh water supplies. When forests are degraded, these services collapse, creating long-term economic costs far greater than short-term profits from logging. Protecting forests as productive systems therefore protects agriculture, cities, and entire regional economies. Human governance plays a decisive role in forest protection. Forests are most successfully conserved and regenerated when local communities and indigenous peoples have secure land rights and direct economic benefits tied to forest health. Traditional ecological knowledge often reflects centuries of sustainable forest management. Community-managed forests consistently demonstrate lower deforestation rates, greater biodiversity, and higher long-term productivity than externally controlled systems. Empowering local stewards aligns economic incentives with ecological outcomes. Economic systems must be redesigned so that standing forests are more valuable than destroyed ones. This can be achieved through payments for ecosystem services, carbon sequestration incentives, regenerative forestry certification, and markets for forest-based biomaterials. When income increases as forests grow, protection becomes a rational and durable economic choice rather than a moral sacrifice. Technology can support sustainable forest production when used carefully and responsibly. Satellite monitoring, drones, and artificial intelligence can detect illegal logging, optimize harvest schedules, and track forest health. Advances in biomaterials reduce pressure on natural forests by replacing extractive materials such as concrete, steel, and plastics. Technology should enhance ecological intelligence rather than replace natural systems. Finally, sustainable forest production requires a cultural transformation. Societies must move beyond short-term profit thinking and recognize forests as intergenerational assets essential to civilization itself. Education systems should emphasize ecological literacy, systems thinking, and long-term stewardship. When forests are understood as living partners in human prosperity rather than obstacles to development, protection and production naturally converge. Forests can be protected and grown as sustainable production systems by aligning human activity with ecological processes. Through continuous cover forestry, biodiversity conservation, diversified forest products, regenerative restoration, community stewardship, and life-centered economic incentives, forests can become increasingly productive while strengthening the climate, supporting biodiversity, and sustaining human societies for generations to come. How can we create an economic system based on rainforest growth? Creating an economic system based on rainforest growth requires redesigning the foundations of production, finance, governance, and culture so that economic activity functions like a living rainforest. Such a system is not built around extraction, scarcity, or short-term profit, but around regeneration, abundance, and long-term resilience. In this model, the economy grows by growing ecosystems, and wealth increases as forests become healthier, more diverse, and more productive. At the most fundamental level, a rainforest-based economic system recognizes photosynthesis as the primary engine of value creation. Sunlight, carbon dioxide, water, and minerals are treated as the core economic inputs, and living organisms, trees, plants, algae, fungi, and microbes, are the primary producers. Through biological growth, these organisms convert atmospheric carbon and solar energy into food, materials, fuels, medicines, and ecosystem services. This replaces fossil fuel dependence with continuous biological regeneration and ensures that economic expansion is tied to ecological restoration rather than depletion. Land use in this system is organized around multi-layered forest ecosystems rather than monocultures or single-purpose infrastructure. Natural rainforests are structured vertically, with canopy trees, sub-canopy plants, shrubs, ground cover, roots, and fungal networks all performing complementary functions. An economy based on rainforest growth mirrors this structure by producing multiple outputs on the same land. Agroforestry systems generate staple foods, fruits, nuts, fibers, oils, and medicinal compounds simultaneously while improving soil fertility and capturing carbon. Urban environments integrate vertical forests, green roofs, algae bioreactors, and mycelium-based construction, turning cities into productive ecological nodes rather than extractive centers. A defining principle of a rainforest-based economy is the elimination of waste. In natural ecosystems, all outputs become inputs for other processes. Human systems can replicate this by designing closed-loop material flows. Organic waste becomes compost or biochar that enriches soils. Carbon emissions are captured and fed into algae cultivation or mineralized into stable forms. Wastewater is purified through constructed wetlands and reused. Materials are designed to be biodegradable or endlessly recyclable. As a result, pollution is eliminated not by restriction but by intelligent system design that mimics natural nutrient cycles. Economic value in a rainforest-based system is measured differently from conventional economies. Instead of prioritizing gross production or consumption, value is tied to regenerative outcomes. Activities that increase forest cover, biodiversity, soil health, water retention, and carbon sequestration are financially rewarded. Currencies, investment instruments, and accounting systems are linked to measurable ecological indicators. Profit becomes a reflection of life created and maintained rather than resources extracted. This alignment ensures that economic self-interest reinforces environmental regeneration. The financial architecture of this system supports long-term growth rather than short-term exploitation. Investment flows toward projects that build living capital, such as reforestation, agroforestry, ecosystem restoration, and bio-based manufacturing. Returns are generated over time as ecosystems mature and become more productive. Risk is reduced because diverse, living systems are inherently more resilient than monocultures or extractive industries. Financial stability emerges from ecological stability. Governance in a rainforest-based economy is decentralized and bioregional. Decision-making authority aligns with ecosystems rather than arbitrary political boundaries. Local communities, especially indigenous and traditional forest stewards, play central roles in management because they possess deep ecological knowledge and have long-term relationships with the land. Secure land rights and shared economic benefits ensure that forest protection and growth are directly linked to human well-being. Global coordination focuses on knowledge sharing, climate stabilization, and biodiversity protection rather than resource competition. This economic system naturally promotes global harmony. Because most value is derived from sunlight and biological growth, dependence on scarce, geopolitically contested resources declines. Regions cooperate based on ecological strengths rather than competing for domination. Food, materials, and energy are produced locally, reducing vulnerability to global supply shocks. As scarcity decreases and ecosystems recover, the drivers of conflict, resource depletion, displacement, and inequality are significantly reduced. Technology plays a supportive role in enabling a rainforest-based economy. Artificial intelligence helps model ecosystem dynamics and optimize regenerative practices. Biotechnology accelerates soil restoration, carbon capture, and plant resilience. Advanced biomaterials reduce pressure on natural forests by replacing extractive materials such as concrete, steel, and plastics. Monitoring systems ensure transparency and accountability, preventing illegal deforestation and ecological degradation. Technology enhances natural processes rather than replacing them. Over time, a rainforest-based economic system transforms civilization itself. Cities become embedded in forests, industries function as metabolic loops, and work becomes participation in ecosystem stewardship. Education emphasizes ecological literacy, systems thinking, and long-term responsibility. Cultural values shift toward cooperation, care, and regeneration. Progress is measured by increasing biodiversity, climatic stability, and human flourishing rather than by consumption or accumulation. In conclusion, an economic system based on rainforest growth is created by aligning human production, finance, and governance with the logic of living ecosystems. By making forest growth the foundation of value creation, eliminating waste through closed-loop design, rewarding regeneration, empowering local stewards, and using technology to amplify natural processes, humanity can build an economy that continuously improves the planet. Such a system not only addresses environmental and social crises, but also lays the foundation for a stable, abundant, and harmonious global civilization. How can this benefit the environment and society both? An economic system based on rainforest growth benefits the environment and society simultaneously because it aligns human well-being, economic stability, and ecological health into a single reinforcing system. Instead of treating environmental protection as a cost to society, this model makes ecological regeneration the foundation of prosperity, safety, and long-term social harmony. The benefits arise from the way rainforest-like systems naturally stabilize climate, produce abundance, reduce conflict, and improve quality of life. From an environmental perspective, a rainforest-based economic system directly addresses the root causes of ecological degradation. By making photosynthesis and biological growth the primary engines of production, the system continuously removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and stores it in biomass and soils. This slows and eventually reverses climate change while restoring natural carbon cycles. As forests expand and diversify, they cool the land surface, regulate rainfall, stabilize weather patterns, and reduce the frequency of extreme events such as floods, droughts, and heat waves. Healthy forests also protect soils from erosion, increase water infiltration, and replenish aquifers, which improves the resilience of entire landscapes. Biodiversity is another major environmental benefit. Rainforest-based systems rely on diverse species performing complementary ecological roles rather than monocultures. This diversity strengthens ecosystem resilience, reduces vulnerability to pest and disease, and supports pollinators, wildlife, and microbial life. As habitats expand and reconnect, extinction rates decline, and ecosystems regain their capacity to self-regulate. The result is a living environment that becomes more stable and productive over time rather than degrading under human use. At the same time, this economic system delivers profound social benefits. By producing food, materials, and energy locally through regenerative forest systems, communities become more self-sufficient and less dependent on fragile global supply chains. This increases food security, reduces vulnerability to economic shocks, and lowers the cost of basic necessities. Because forests can produce a wide variety of goods without being destroyed, long-term employment is created in land stewardship, restoration, agroforestry, biomanufacturing, and ecosystem management. Health outcomes also improve significantly. Forest-rich environments provide cleaner air, purer water, more nutritious food, and cooler urban climates. Reduced pollution lowers rates of respiratory and cardiovascular disease, while access to green spaces improves mental health and social well-being. Preventive health benefits reduce healthcare costs and increase overall quality of life. Economic inequality is reduced because a rainforest-based economy distributes value more evenly. Wealth is generated through ecosystem restoration rather than resource extraction controlled by a few actors. Local communities, particularly indigenous and rural populations, gain secure livelihoods tied to forest health rather than displacement or exploitation. When people benefit directly from protecting ecosystems, environmental stewardship becomes a shared social goal rather than an imposed restriction. This system also promotes social stability and peace. Many conflicts arise from resource scarcity, land degradation, and economic exclusion. By restoring ecosystems and producing abundance from renewable biological processes, the underlying drivers of conflict are reduced. Cooperation becomes more beneficial than competition, both within societies and between nations. Shared ecological goals encourage collaboration and knowledge exchange, climate stabilization, and biodiversity protection. Culturally, a rainforest-based economic system fosters a sense of purpose and connection. Work becomes meaningful participation in maintaining life support systems rather than repetitive extraction or pollution. Education emphasizes ecological literacy, cooperation, and long-term responsibility, strengthening social cohesion and intergenerational trust. Communities develop identities rooted in care, resilience, and shared stewardship of the land. In the long term, the combined environmental and social benefits reinforce one another. Healthier ecosystems produce greater and more reliable abundance, which supports stable societies. Stable societies, in turn, are better able to protect and regenerate ecosystems. This positive feedback loop replaces the destructive cycle of environmental degradation and social instability with a regenerative cycle of ecological recovery and human flourishing. An economic system based on rainforest growth benefits the environment by restoring climate stability, biodiversity, soils, and water systems, while benefiting society by improving health, security, equity, and social harmony. By unifying ecological regeneration and human prosperity into a single framework, this model offers a realistic and durable pathway toward a thriving planet and a peaceful, resilient civilization. How can we protect and expand rainforests to build the most sustainable civilization and upgrade society in every way? Protecting and expanding rainforests to build the most sustainable civilization and upgrade society in every way requires redesigning how humanity organizes land use, economics, governance, technology, and culture so that rainforest growth becomes the foundation of progress rather than an obstacle to development. Rainforests must be understood not as untouchable wilderness or exploitable resources, but as living infrastructure that supports climate stability, food systems, economies, health, and long-term civilizational resilience. At the most basic level, rainforests must be protected by eliminating the drivers of their destruction. Deforestation is primarily caused by short-term economic pressures such as industrial agriculture expansion, extractive logging, mining, and infrastructure built without ecological integration. These pressures can only be stopped permanently by making intact forests more economically valuable than cleared land. This means shifting incentives so that protecting and growing forests generates stable income, food, materials, and social benefits over generations. When livelihoods depend on forest health, protection becomes self-reinforcing rather than enforced from the outside. A key strategy is transitioning from deforestation-based land use to regenerative forest production systems. Instead of clear-cutting forests for monocultures or grazing, land is managed as continuous cover, multi-layered ecosystems that resemble natural rainforests. These systems produce food, fibers, medicines, resins, oils, building materials, and energy simultaneously while increasing biodiversity and carbon storage. Agroforestry, food forests, and regenerative forestry allow human use without ecological collapse, enabling forests to expand rather than shrink as populations grow. Expanding rainforests also requires large-scale ecological restoration. Degraded lands, abandoned agricultural areas, and deforested regions can be regenerated through assisted natural regeneration, which protects young trees, restores soil life, and allows ecosystems to recover naturally. Where needed, diverse native species are introduced to rebuild functional forest networks rather than simplified plantations. Mycorrhizal fungi, soil microbes, and keystone species are restored to accelerate ecosystem recovery. Over time, fragmented forests reconnect into continuous ecological corridors that support wildlife, stabilize climate, and enhance regional resilience. Rainforests must be recognized as critical planetary infrastructure, equivalent to energy grids or water systems. They regulate rainfall, moderate temperatures, prevent floods and droughts, protect soils, and maintain fresh water supplies. Protecting and expanding forests therefore upgrades civilization's life support systems. When rainforests are restored, agricultural productivity increases downstream, cities become cooler and more livable, and disaster risks decline. The economic value of these services far exceeds the short-term profits of deforestation. Economic systems must be redesigned so that rainforest growth is the primary source of wealth creation. This involves rewarding carbon sequestration, biodiversity increases, water cycle restoration, and soil regeneration. Financial systems, public investment, and trade policies should prioritize projects that expand forest cover and ecological complexity. Forest-based biomaterials, carbon-negative construction, biomanufacturing, and ecosystem services become major economic sectors. In this model, Economic growth directly corresponds to ecological growth. Social upgrading occurs when rainforest expansion is tied to human well-being. Forest-centered economies create long-term employment in restoration, stewardship, research, ecological design, education, and bio-based industries. Local and indigenous communities gain secure land rights and leadership roles, recognizing their deep ecological knowledge and long-term stewardship practices. When communities benefit directly from forest health, social stability, cultural continuity, and intergenerational resilience are strengthened. Urban and industrial systems must also change to support rainforest expansion rather than undermine it. Cities can reduce pressure on forests by replacing resource-intensive materials with sustainable biomaterials, recycling wood and organic matter, and integrating urban forests, green corridors, and vertical vegetation. Waste streams from cities can be transformed into nutrients that support reforestation and soil regeneration. This reconnects urban life with ecological cycles rather than isolating it from nature. Technology plays a supportive role by enhancing humanity's ability to protect and expand rainforests intelligently. Satellite monitoring, drones, and artificial intelligence can detect illegal deforestation, monitor forest health, and guide restoration strategies. Biotechnology can improve soil recovery, plant resilience, and carbon capture without reducing biodiversity. Advanced modeling helps predict climate-forest feedbacks, ensuring that restoration efforts maximize rainfall generation, cooling effects, and ecosystem stability. Technology becomes a tool for amplifying natural processes rather than replacing them. Education and culture must evolve alongside these structural changes. A rainforest-based civilization requires ecological literacy, systems thinking, and long-term responsibility to future generations. Education systems should teach how forests function as living systems and why human prosperity depends on them. Cultural values shift from domination and extraction toward stewardship, cooperation, and regeneration. Success is measured not by consumption, but by the health of ecosystems and communities. As rainforests expand and mature, they create positive feedback loops that upgrade society in every dimension. Ecologically, climate stabilizes, biodiversity flourishes, and landscapes become more resilient. Economically, abundance is generated from renewable biological processes rather than finite extraction. Socially, inequality declines as wealth is distributed through ecosystem stewardship rather than monopolized resources. Politically, cooperation replaces conflicts as resource scarcity diminishes. Psychologically and culturally, humans regain a sense of belonging within the living world. In the long term, protecting and expanding rainforests does more than solve environmental problems, it transforms civilization itself. Humanity becomes a regenerative force that increases planetary life rather than degrading it. Cities become forest-integrated habitats, economies function like ecosystems, and progress is defined by increasing harmony between people and the earth. This is how rainforests can become the foundation of the most sustainable civilization possible, and a comprehensive upgrade of society in every meaningful way. How can establish global peace and equity through rainforest and forest protection, growth and productions? Establishing global peace and equity through rainforest and forest protection, growth, and production is possible because forests directly address the deepest structural causes of conflict and inequality: resource scarcity, ecological collapse, economic exclusion, and loss of local autonomy. When forests are treated as living economic infrastructure rather than expendable resources, they become engines of abundance, stability, and cooperation. This transforms forests from contested territories into shared foundations for peace. The first step is recognizing that many modern conflicts originate from environmental degradation. Deforestation contributes to droughts, floods, food shortages, and displacement, which in turn fuel political instability, migration crises, and violence. Protecting and expanding forests stabilizes climate and water cycles, ensuring reliable rainfall, fertile soils, and predictable growing conditions. When basic ecological needs are met, societies are far less likely to fall into conflict over land, water, and food. Forest protection therefore acts as preventive peacebuilding by removing the environmental stressors that trigger violence. Forest-based economies also create pathways to equity by replacing extractive industries with regenerative livelihoods. Conventional extraction concentrates wealth in the hands of a few, while leaving local populations impoverished and environments destroyed. In contrast, sustainable forest production generates continuous income from food forests, non-timber products, biomaterials, medicines, ecosystem services, and long-lived wood products. These activities provide long-term employment and local ownership rather than short-term exploitation. When communities can meet their needs through regenerative forest stewardship, economic exclusion declines and social cohesion increases. Equity is further strengthened when forest governance centers local and indigenous communities. Indigenous peoples protect a significant share of the world's remaining forests, often with lower deforestation rates than state-managed areas. Securing land rights and recognizing traditional ecological knowledge empowers communities to manage forests sustainably while preserving cultural identity. This corrects historical injustices, redistributes power, and builds trust between societies and institutions. Peace is more likely when people have dignity, autonomy, and a stake in the future of their land. At the global level, forests reduce geopolitical competition by lowering dependence on scarce, conflict-prone resources. As economies shift from fossil fuels and mineral-intensive industries to forest-based biomaterials and solar-driven biological production, the strategic importance of oil fields, mines, and resource choke points declines. Value creation becomes decentralized and widely accessible, reducing the incentives for territorial conquest and economic coercion. Cooperation around ecosystem restoration becomes more beneficial than competition for extraction. Forests also support peace by enabling shared global goals. Climate stabilization, biodiversity protection, and water security are collective challenges that no nation can solve alone. Forest protection and expansion provide a unifying framework for international cooperation based on mutual benefit rather than zero-sum rivalry. Joint reforestation projects, shared ecological knowledge, and coordinated carbon drawdown efforts foster diplomatic collaboration and trust. When nations work together to grow life, relationships shift from adversarial to cooperative. Forest-centered development improves human health and social stability, which are essential for peace. Healthy forests reduce air and water pollution, lower disease burdens, and provide nutritious food and medicinal resources. Improved public health reduces social stress and economic inequality, strengthening the social fabric. Access to green spaces also improves mental well-being, reduces violence, and fosters community resilience. Peace is sustained not only by political agreements but by healthy, secure populations. Education and cultural transformation play a crucial role in translating forest protection into lasting peace. When societies understand their dependence on living ecosystems, values shift toward stewardship, interdependence, and long-term responsibility. Forest-based education teaches cooperation, systems thinking, and respect for diversity, mirroring the structure of forest ecosystems themselves. These cultural shifts reduce polarization and promote inclusive governance. Finally, forests enable a new model of development that aligns prosperity with care rather than exploitation. By making forest growth the basis of economic success, societies reward actions that increase life rather than destroy it. This creates a positive feedback loop in which environmental regeneration, economic equity, and social peace reinforce one another. Over time, forests become symbols and instruments of shared prosperity rather than sources of conflict. In conclusion, global peace and equity can be established through rainforest and forest protection, growth, and production by addressing the root causes of conflict, creating inclusive regenerative economies, empowering local stewards, reducing geopolitical competition, and fostering international cooperation. By organizing civilization around the growth of living systems, humanity can replace cycles of scarcity and violence with cycles of abundance, justice, and lasting peace. How can we terraform other planets through an economic system based on rainforest and forest protection, expansion, biodiversity and productions? Terraforming other planets through an economic system based on rainforest and forest protection, expansion, biodiversity, and production is possible because life itself is the most powerful planetary engineering force known. On Earth, forests transformed a hostile early planet into a stable, oxygen-rich, climate-regulated world capable of supporting complex life. An economy modeled on this process does not treat terraforming as a purely mechanical or extractive task, but as a life-centered, regenerative, and self-sustaining expansion of ecosystems. In this system, economic activity and planetary transformation are the same process. At its core, terraforming through a forest-based economic system begins with the understanding that ecosystems are the true infrastructure of habitable planets. Forests regulate atmospheric composition, stabilize temperatures, generate rainfall, build soil, and create closed nutrient cycles. Rather than importing massive industrial machinery to reshape planets, humanity would deploy living systems that grow, self-repair, and increase in complexity over time. The economy supports this process by rewarding the creation, expansion, and long-term health of these systems rather than short-term extraction. The first stage of terraforming involves preparing lifeless or hostile environments for biological activity. On planets such as Mars or moons with thin atmospheres, the process would begin with hardy pioneer life forms, including engineered microbes, algae, cyanobacteria, lichens, and fungi. These organisms can survive extreme conditions and begin altering planetary chemistry. They capture carbon dioxide, release oxygen, fix nitrogen, break down rock into soil, and stabilize surfaces. In economic terms, these organisms are the first productive assets, supported by investment in biological infrastructure rather than mining or mechanical construction. As these pioneer ecosystems spread, they initiate positive planetary feedback loops. Microbial life darkens planetary surfaces, increasing heat absorption and gradually warming the environment. Atmospheric composition begins to shift as carbon dioxide is converted into biomass and oxygen. Early soil formation allows water to be retained rather than lost, creating localized microclimates. The economic system rewards these changes because atmospheric stabilization, soil creation, and climate moderation are treated as valuable outputs, just as carbon sequestration and ecosystem services are valued on Earth. Once basic environmental thresholds are reached, the second phase introduces increasingly complex plant life. Mosses, grasses, shrubs, and eventually trees are established in protected regions such as domes, valleys, or subsurface habitats. These early forests function as planetary climate engines. They release moisture into the atmosphere, promote cloud formation, and regulate temperature extremes. Through transpiration and surface cooling, forests help establish stable weather patterns. Each expansion of forest cover improves planetary habitability, allowing the next stage of biological complexity to emerge. The economic system during this phase is based on forest growth as production. Instead of exporting resources off-world, value is generated locally through food production, biomaterials, medicines, oxygen generation, water purification, and energy capture via photosynthesis. Forests provide building materials grown in place, reducing the need for energy-intensive imports. Human settlements are embedded within these ecosystems, relying on closed-loop systems where waste becomes nutrients and every output feeds another biological process. Economic stability arises from ecological stability. As biodiversity increases, ecosystems become more resilient and self-sustaining. Diverse plant species, fungi, and microbial communities cooperate to cycle nutrients efficiently, resist disease, and adapt to environmental variability. This mirrors how Earth's rainforests achieve extraordinary productivity without external inputs. On a planetary scale, biodiversity becomes a form of risk management, ensuring that the terraforming process does not collapse due to single-point failures. The economic system encourages diversity because resilience, not speed, determines long-term success. Over time, these forest-based ecosystems expand beyond initial containment zones. As atmospheric pressure increases, temperatures stabilize, and water cycles intensify, open-air ecosystems become possible. Forests gradually replace barren terrain, connecting into planetary-scale ecological networks. Rivers form, soils deepen, and wildlife can eventually be introduced. At this stage, the planet transitions from an engineered habitat to a living world capable of autonomous regeneration. This approach fundamentally differs from traditional visions of terraforming that rely on massive industrial intervention. Mechanical systems degrade, require constant maintenance, and concentrate power. Living systems grow, self-organize, and distribute productivity. A forest-based economic model ensures that terraforming is not a one-time project but an ongoing, evolving process that benefits every generation involved. Economic incentives remain aligned with ecosystem health because the planet itself is the source of all value. Socially and ethically, this model avoids repeating the mistakes of extractive colonization. New worlds are not exploited as resource frontiers but cultivated as shared ecological commons. Governance is organized around stewardship rather than ownership, with long-term planetary health prioritized over short-term profit. This reduces conflict, encourages cooperation, and ensures that expansion into space strengthens rather than destabilizes civilization. Ultimately, terraforming through rainforest and forest-based economic systems represents the maturation of human civilization. Humanity becomes a planetary gardener rather than a conqueror. Economic growth becomes synonymous with the spread of life, biodiversity, and resilience. Worlds are not stripped and abandoned, but patiently transformed into thriving ecosystems that support human societies while enriching the universe with living complexity. In this way, an economic system based on forest protection, expansion, biodiversity, and production does not merely terraform planets, It extends the logic of life itself across the cosmos, creating habitable worlds through regeneration, cooperation, and the continuous growth of living systems. How can we create cities and industries that support rainforest protection, biodiversity, growth and expansion to start the most regenerative civilization? Creating cities and industries that actively support rainforest protection, biodiversity, growth, and expansion requires redesigning urban life, production systems, and economic incentives so that they function as extensions of living ecosystems rather than forces that degrade them. In a regenerative civilization, cities and industries do not compete with forests for land and resources. Instead, they reduce pressure on natural ecosystems while actively contributing to their restoration and expansion. This transformation integrates ecology into every layer of human development. The foundation of regenerative cities is a shift from linear consumption to ecological metabolism. Conventional cities extract resources, concentrate waste, and export pollution. Regenerative cities are designed to operate like ecosystems, where energy, water, nutrients, and materials circulate in closed loops. Organic waste is composted or converted into biochar and returned to soils that support reforestation and agroforestry. Wastewater is purified through constructed wetlands and reused to irrigate green corridors and surrounding forest systems. Carbon emissions are captured and transformed into biological inputs for algae cultivation, soil restoration, or biomaterial production. In this way, urban metabolism directly feeds rainforest growth rather than undermining it. Urban form plays a critical role in supporting biodiversity and forest expansion. Dense, compact cities reduce land consumption and prevent sprawl into forested areas. Vertical construction, mixed-use zoning, and efficient public transportation minimize the physical footprint of urban life. Green infrastructure such as urban forests, green roofs, living walls, and wildlife corridors reconnect fragmented habitats and allow species to move through human-dominated landscapes. Cities become ecological nodes within larger forest networks rather than isolated concrete islands. Industries in a regenerative civilization are designed around bio-based production rather than extractive processes. Manufacturing shifts towards materials grown from sunlight, such as engineered wood, bamboo, hemp, mycelium, algae, and bio-based polymers. These materials reduce demand for mining, fossil fuels, and destructive logging while creating markets for sustainable forest management. Factories function as biorefineries that process plant-based inputs into high-value products with minimal waste. By prioritizing long-lived, recyclable, and biodegradable goods, industries reduce pressure on ecosystems and extend the carbon storage function of forests. Energy systems are fully aligned with ecological regeneration. Cities and industries are powered primarily by renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, geothermal, and sustainably managed biomass. Photosynthetic energy capture through algae systems and solar-integrated buildings complements conventional renewables. Decentralized energy generation reduces the need for large-scale infrastructure that fragments forests and landscapes. Energy abundance generated without emissions supports forest protection by eliminating dependence on fossil fuel extraction in ecologically sensitive regions. Economic incentives are restructured so that urban and industrial success depends on ecological contribution. Cities and companies are rewarded for increasing forest cover, biodiversity, soil health, and water retention. Public procurement policies prioritize regenerative materials and services. Financial systems channel investment into reforestation, ecological restoration, and forest-based industries. Corporate accountability frameworks measure success through ecological performance rather than short-term profit alone. In this model, protecting and expanding rainforests becomes a core business objective rather than an external obligation. Urban populations play a direct role in forest stewardship. Cities form partnerships with surrounding rural and forested regions, creating bioregional governance systems. Urban demand for food, materials, and energy is met through nearby regenerative forest systems, reducing transportation emissions and strengthening regional resilience. City residents participate in restoration programs, ecological education, and long-term stewardship initiatives. This reconnects urban societies with the ecosystems that sustain them and fosters a culture of care and responsibility. Technology supports this transformation by providing transparency, efficiency, and ecological intelligence. Sensors, satellite data, and artificial intelligence monitor forest health, biodiversity, and ecosystem services in real time. This data informs urban planning, industrial design, and restoration strategies. Digital platforms enable traceability of forest-based products, ensuring that consumption supports regeneration rather than destruction. Technology becomes a tool for aligning human systems with natural processes rather than accelerating exploitation. Cultural and educational systems within cities reinforce regenerative values. Schools, universities, and public institutions integrate ecological literacy, systems thinking, and restoration practices into curricula. Urban design emphasizes access to nature, green spaces, and communal environments that support mental and physical well-being. Art, media, and public narrative celebrate regeneration, cooperation, and long-term stewardship. A shared cultural identity emerges in which forest protection and biodiversity are seen as central to societal progress. Over time, these regenerative cities and industries create powerful positive feedback loops. Reduced ecological pressure allows rainforests to recover and expand. Expanding forests stabilize climate, enhance water cycles, and increase biological productivity, which in turn supports urban food systems, material supply chains, and economic resilience. Social well-being improves as pollution declines, green spaces increase, and meaningful work in restoration and stewardship becomes widespread, creating cities and industries that support rainforest protection. Biodiversity, growth, and expansion requires integrating ecological principles into urban design, industrial production, economic incentives, governance, and culture. By transforming cities into regenerative ecosystems and industries into partners of living systems, humanity can initiate a civilization that grows wealth by growing life. This marks the beginning of a truly regenerative civilization, one that continuously improves the planet while enhancing human prosperity, equity, and long-term stability. The rainforest economy, designing a regenerative civilization for planetary flourishing. Learning from 4 billion years of innovation, humanity stands at a pivotal crossroads. Our current civilization, built on extraction, competition, and the myth of infinite growth on a finite planet, has brought us to the brink of ecological collapse and social fragmentation. Yet the solution to our predicament has been demonstrating itself all around us for billions of years. The natural world, particularly rainforest ecosystems, shows us how complex systems can become more abundant, resilient, and diverse over time rather than depleting their resource base. A mature rainforest doesn't consume its capital and decline into poverty. Instead, it continuously generates more life, more complexity, more beauty, and more resources the longer it exists. It achieves this remarkable feat not through competition and domination but through cooperation, reciprocity, and what ecologists call facilitation, where each organism makes the environment more hospitable for others. This essay explores how we might design human civilization using these same principles, creating what we might call a rainforest economy that regenerates rather than degrades the living systems on which all prosperity ultimately depends. This is not merely an environmental conservation strategy or a technological fix. It represents a fundamental reimagining of how we organize economic activity, structure governance, deploy technology, and relate to each other and the more than human world. Most importantly, it offers a practical pathway toward the lasting peace that has eluded humanity throughout recorded history, recognizing that peace and sustainability are not separate goals but deeply intertwined aspects of the same transformation. The wisdom of the rainforest, principles for regenerative design. Before we can apply rainforest principles to human systems, we must understand what makes these ecosystems so extraordinarily successful. A rainforest operates on several key principles that distinguish it from extractive, degrading systems. First, it practices perfect circularity where waste simply does not exist. Every output from one organism becomes valuable input for another. Dead leaves become food for decomposers, which create nutrients for plants, which produce sugars for fungi, which extend the nutrient gathering capacity of tree roots in a continuous cycle. Second, it maximizes diversity, recognizing that resilience comes from having many different species filling many different niches, ensuring that if one strategy fails, countless others remain viable. Third, it operates on cooperation as much as competition, with mycorrhizal fungal networks sharing nutrients between trees, nitrogen-fixing plants enriching soil for their neighbors, and countless symbiotic relationships where mutual benefit exceeds what either partner could achieve alone. Fourth, it builds complexity and stores energy over time rather than simplifying systems for short-term extraction. A young forest gradually develops into old growth with an increasingly intricate canopy structure, richer soil, more diverse species assemblages, and greater total biomass. Fifth, it operates on solar income rather than fossil capital, running entirely on the continuous energy flow from the sun, rather than depleting ancient stores of concentrated energy. Sixth, It maintains distributed intelligence with no central command structure, yet coordinates the activity of billions of organisms to create a coherent, functioning whole. Finally, it practices what indigenous wisdom traditions call seven-generation thinking, with life strategies that ensure the system will remain viable far into the future, rather than optimizing for immediate returns at the expense of long-term viability. These principles offer a complete blueprint for redesigning human civilization. The question is not whether such principles could work at human scale, since we know they work at every scale in nature from microbial communities to entire biomes. The question is whether we have the collective wisdom and courage to reorganize our societies accordingly, letting go of assumptions and institutions that serve us poorly even though they are familiar. Economic foundation. From extraction to regeneration, the economy of a regenerative civilization must be rebuilt from its foundations, starting with how we define and create value. Our current economic system treats the living earth as an inert stockpile of resources to be extracted, processed, consumed, and discarded, with any resulting pollution or ecosystem degradation dismissed as externalities that supposedly exist outside the economy. This is obvious nonsense. The economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the biosphere, not the other way around. Every economic transaction ultimately depends on ecological processes, photosynthesis capturing solar energy, soil organisms making nutrients plant available, pollinators enabling food production, forests regulating water cycles and climate, wetlands purifying water, and the vast web of relationships that maintains the atmospheric composition, temperature range, and biogeochemical cycles that make Earth habitable. A regenerative economy explicitly recognizes these dependencies and redesigns economic activity to strengthen rather than undermine them. This begins with establishing true circularity throughout the production system. We must eliminate the entire concept of waste by designing every product, package, and process so that materials flow in continuous loops. Biological materials should be designed to biodegrade safely and quickly, returning nutrients to soil and water in forms that support living systems. Technical materials like metals, glass, and engineered polymers should be designed for perpetual recycling, with products built for easy disassembly so that every component can be recovered and remanufactured. The transition to circular material flows is not merely an environmental nicety but an economic imperative. Linear systems that require constant virgin resource inputs will inevitably face increasing scarcity and cost as we deplete the easily accessible deposits, while circular systems create value from waste streams and free themselves from resource constraints. Beyond circularity in material flows, we need circularity in how value is created and distributed. Current economic structures concentrate wealth upward through mechanisms like compound interest, rent extraction, and monopoly pricing, creating societies where a small minority controls most resources while the majority struggles with artificial scarcity. This concentration is not only morally indefensible but also economically inefficient, as it depresses overall demand and creates the social tensions that destabilize societies. A regenerative economy would incorporate mechanisms that circulate wealth more like nutrients in a healthy ecosystem. This could include structures like worker cooperatives where those who create value share in its fruits, community land trusts that remove housing from speculative markets, sovereign wealth funds that invest resource revenues for collective benefit, and public banking systems that recirculate profits into community development rather than extracting them to distant shareholders. Perhaps most fundamentally, we must expand our definition of what constitutes valuable economic activity. The current system only recognizes value that passes through market transactions, which means that vast swaths of essential activity go uncounted and unrewarded. A parent raising children contributes nothing to GDP. Someone restoring a degraded watershed contributes nothing to GDP. An elder sharing traditional ecological knowledge contributes nothing to GDP. An artist creating beauty that nourishes the human spirit contributes nothing to GDP unless someone buys the art. A researcher developing open source technologies that benefit millions contributes nothing to GDP because no proprietary value is captured. Meanwhile, activities that actively harm human well-being and ecological health do contribute to GDP, creating perverse incentives throughout the system. We need new metrics that measure what actually matters for human and ecological flourishing. This means tracking ecosystem health through indicators like biodiversity levels, forest coverage, soil carbon content, clean water availability, and the populations of keystone species. It means measuring social well-being through factors like community cohesion, access to healthcare and education, creative expression, and direct reports of life satisfaction. It means valuing the knowledge commons by tracking how much useful information and technology is freely available to everyone. When we measure progress this way, we can design economic policies and institutions that genuinely optimize for human and ecological thriving, rather than the arbitrary maximization of monetary transactions. Social architecture, cooperation across scale. The social organization of a regenerative civilization must enable cooperation across multiple scales while maintaining local autonomy and democratic participation. Nature demonstrates this beautifully through nested systems, where each level has its own integrity while participating in larger wholes. A cell functions as a complete unit while participating in tissues. Tissues function as complete units while participating in organs. Organs function as complete units while participating in organisms. Organisms function as complete units while participating in ecosystems. At each level, there is autonomy and agency, yet each level also contributes to and depends on the levels that contain and compose it. We can design human organizations using this same nested structure. At the most local level, we need institutions that give people direct democratic control over the economic and social conditions of their lives. Worker cooperatives allow those who do the work to govern the enterprise and share in its success. Housing cooperatives give residents control over their living conditions. Community land trusts remove land from speculative markets and place it under collective stewardship. Local food cooperatives connect eaters directly with growers. These institutions root economic power in relationships of mutual accountability rather than in hierarchies of ownership and command. These local cooperatives connect with others in their region to form networks that can coordinate larger-scale projects, share resources during times of abundance or scarcity, and provide mutual support during challenges. A network of worker cooperatives can establish shared infrastructure for technical support, marketing, or training. A network of housing cooperatives can create regional land trusts and development funds. A network of food cooperatives can coordinate with farmers to ensure stable markets and supply. This regional level provides resilience through diversification and economies of scale, while maintaining the democratic participation and mutual accountability of the local level. Regional networks then connect to bioregional systems organized around natural boundaries like watersheds and ecosystems, rather than the arbitrary lines of political jurisdictions. A bioregional organization might coordinate water management across an entire watershed, ensuring that upstream activities don't harm downstream communities, and that everyone contributes to maintaining the hydrological systems that sustain the entire region. It might coordinate habitat restoration efforts, creating wildlife corridors that span the territories of multiple municipalities. It might facilitate the exchange of specialized products between different ecological zones within the bioregion, building on the unique capacities of each area. Finally, bioregional systems maintain connections to global coordination bodies that address challenges requiring planetary cooperation, such as climate stabilization, ocean health, disease prevention, and the advancement of knowledge. This global level enables humanity to act as a coherent species when necessary while respecting the enormous diversity of cultures, ecologies, and social organizations that exist at more local levels. The key is that power and decision-making authority remain as local as possible, with broader levels coordinating only what cannot be effectively managed locally. This nested structure creates extraordinary resilience because damage or failure at one level or in one location does not cascade to destroy the entire system. It also maintains efficiency and coordination at large scales while preserving the human-scale relationships and democratic participation that give people genuine agency in shaping their lives. It mimics the successful architecture of all complex living systems, which achieved their remarkable robustness precisely through this combination of local autonomy and multi-scale integration. Within this nested organizational structure, we can implement universal basic ecology, a program that guarantees everyone access to fundamental resources including housing, nutritious food, healthcare, and education, while requesting in return that they contribute to ecosystem regeneration and community well-being in whatever ways suit their capacities and interests. This decouples human survival from participation in extractive or destructive economic activity, which is currently one of the primary forces driving ecological degradation. When people must accept any employment to avoid destitution, they cannot refuse work that harms their communities or ecosystems. When survival is guaranteed, people become free to organize their labor in genuinely regenerative ways. Contributions to the regenerative economy could take countless forms. Some people might focus on direct ecological restoration, planting trees, removing invasive species, restoring wetlands, building soil, or monitoring watershed health. Others might focus on care work, supporting children, elders, or community members with disabilities or health challenges. Still others might create art, music, stories, and cultural expressions that nourish the human spirit and strengthen community bonds. Some might focus on research, education, and the development of open-source technologies that help everyone live more sustainably. All of these contributions are valuable, and all currently go largely uncompensated in market economies despite being essential to human flourishing. Governance. Blending ancient wisdom and modern capabilities, the governance structures of a regenerative civilization must integrate the deep time-tested wisdom of indigenous knowledge, keeping traditions with the unprecedented coordination capabilities made possible by modern communications technology and artificial intelligence. For most of human history, indigenous peoples around the world maintained sustainable relationships with their local ecosystems through sophisticated systems of traditional ecological knowledge, ceremonial practices that encoded sustainable behaviors, and governance structures that ensured decisions considered their effects 7 generations into the future. These societies were not primitive or simple, but rather had developed exquisitely refined understandings of how to live in reciprocal relationship with the more than human world. In the drive toward modernization and economic development, much of this wisdom has been dismissed or actively suppressed, even as the societies that rejected its barrel toward ecological collapse. A regenerative civilization would recognize indigenous knowledge as an essential foundation for sustainability and would create governance structures that honor and empower indigenous peoples as leaders and teachers. This means restoring indigenous peoples to governance authority over their traditional territories, providing meaningful reparations for the land theft and genocide they have endured, and creating formal roles for indigenous wisdom keepers in regional and global decision-making bodies. It also means all communities developing their own deep knowledge of their local ecosystems through long-term observation, traditional practices, and humble relationship with the land, water, and other beings that share their place. At the same time, modern technology provides capabilities that no previous human society possessed. We can monitor ecosystem health across vast scales through satellite imagery and sensor networks. We can model complex system dynamics and predict the long-term consequences of different policy choices. We can facilitate democratic participation and deliberation among millions of people who never physically gather in one place. We can provide real-time translation across languages and cultural frameworks, enabling genuine communication across human diversity. We can use artificial intelligence to identify patterns in vast datasets, synthesize information from thousands of sources, surface unexpected connections and creative solutions, and help us understand how our actions ripple through complex systems over long time horizons. The governance challenge is to integrate these capabilities in service of wisdom, rather than as replacements for human judgment and moral reasoning. AI should function as a tool that enhances human deliberation rather than displacing it. Imagine a decision-making process where communities engage in extensive dialogue about a significant choice, perhaps how to manage a shared watershed or whether to permit a proposed development project. Throughout this dialogue, AI systems could provide relevant information about ecological conditions, offer analysis of how similar decisions played out elsewhere, model the likely consequences of different options, and help identify areas of unexpected agreement among seemingly opposed positions. The AI might surface creative alternatives that bridge different values and priorities, or highlight trade-offs and uncertainties that need to be explicitly considered. However, the AI would not make the decision or claim to know the objectively correct answer. It would enhance the quality of human deliberation by making more information accessible and helping people understand complexity. But the moral judgment about what should be done would remain with the human communities who will live with the consequences. This keeps human agency and responsibility central, while using technology to augment our limited individual and collective cognition. It recognizes that while AI can help us understand systems and consequences, questions about what is good, what is just, and how we should live together remain fundamentally human questions that require human wisdom to answer. Technological integration, tools that heal technology in a regenerative civilization would be designed and deployed with fundamentally different goals than technology and extractive economies. Currently, most technological development aims to increase the productivity of labor or the efficiency of resource extraction, with the implicit purpose of generating profit for investors. While efficiency is valuable, optimizing for profit within extractive frameworks often drives technologies that intensify exploitation of both human workers and ecosystems. We need instead to optimize for technologies that enhance life, heal damaged systems, deepen sustainable relationships, and distribute benefits equitably. This begins with biomimetic infrastructure that functions more like living organisms than like inert machines. Rather than designing buildings as sealed boxes that require constant energy inputs for climate control while contributing nothing to the surrounding environment, we can create structures that actively participate in ecosystem processes. Living walls covered in plants photosynthesize to produce oxygen, sequester carbon, cool the air through evapotranspiration, and provide habitat for insects and birds. Green roofs insulate buildings while absorbing rainfall, reducing urban flooding and heat island effects. Natural ventilation systems modeled on termite mounds or prairie dog burrows use solar heating and convection to move air without mechanical fans. Rainwater harvesting and greywater recycling reduce demand on municipal systems, while providing irrigation for living walls and food gardens. Water infrastructure can incorporate constructed wetlands and living machines that use plants, bacteria, and natural processes to purify water rather than relying on energy-intensive chemical treatment. These biological systems not only clean water effectively but also create valuable habitat, sequester carbon, and produce biomass that can be composted or used as animal fodder. Transportation systems can integrate vegetation corridors that provide pollinator habitat while beautifying the urban environment and improving air quality. Even roads and parking areas can be redesigned with permeable surfaces that allow water infiltration, support underground fungal networks, and eliminate the toxic runoff that currently plagues urban waterways. The goal is to ask every piece of infrastructure to perform multiple functions simultaneously, providing human services while also supporting ecosystem health, creating habitat, sequestering carbon, managing water, and building soil. This integration allows human activity to contribute positively to the living systems within which it is embedded rather than existing as a dead zone that must be compensated for through conservation elsewhere. It recognizes that humans are part of ecosystems, not separate from them, and that our built environment should strengthen rather than sever our connections to the more than human world. Beyond infrastructure, we need to democratize access to essential technologies by treating them as commons rather than as proprietary products. All technologies related to fundamental human needs, including clean energy generation and storage, water purification, sustainable food production, healthcare, education, and communication, should be developed as open source resources that anyone can access, use, modify, improve, and share. This approach recognizes that innovation accelerates when knowledge flows freely and when diverse minds can contribute creative adaptations for different contexts. It ensures that solutions to critical challenges can spread rapidly to communities everywhere regardless of their ability to pay monopoly prices for patented technologies. Open source technology development also aligns incentives toward genuine problem solving rather than toward creating proprietary lock-in. When a solar panel design is open source, improvements benefit everyone and the technology evolves rapidly through contributions from diverse practitioners. When a solar panel is proprietary, the owning company has incentive to deliberately limit its lifespan, prevent repairs, and block competitors even when that slows overall progress. By making essential technologies commons, we unleash vastly more creative capacity while ensuring that advances serve human needs rather than corporate profits. Artificial intelligence deserves special attention as perhaps the most powerful technology humans have yet developed. In extractive economies, AI is primarily deployed to intensify surveillance, manipulate consumer behavior, displace workers, optimize resource extraction, and concentrate wealth and power. We can instead deploy AI as a guardian and partner in the regeneration of the living world. AI could help us translate between human languages and potentially even help us better understand the communication of other species through their vocalizations, chemical signals, and behavioral patterns, opening possibilities for genuine interspecies dialogue. AI could monitor ecosystem health across scales impossible for human observation alone, detecting early warning signs of stress and alerting communities to respond before small problems cascade into crises. AI could optimize resource flows through economic networks, identifying where surplus and scarcity exist and suggesting pathways to bring them into balance without creating the poverty amidst abundance that plagues current distribution systems. Perhaps most importantly, AI could help humans overcome our cognitive limitations around long-term thinking by modeling how today's choices will ripple through complex systems over decades and centuries, helping us practice the seven-generation thinking that indigenous wisdom has long advocated. By designing AI as a tool for enhancing human wisdom and ecological intelligence, rather than as a mechanism for exploitation and control, we can harness its unprecedented capabilities in service of life. Peace infrastructure, making cooperation more profitable than conflict. A regenerative civilization offers unprecedented possibilities for achieving lasting peace among human communities because it restructures the fundamental incentives that drive conflict. Throughout history, most wars have been fought over access to scarce resources, with groups attempting to secure for themselves what they feared others would take. But scarcity itself is largely an artifact of extractive systems that create artificial shortages through hoarding, waste, and the concentration of wealth. When economies are designed for regeneration and circular flows, when essential technologies are open source commons, when communities develop reciprocal relationships rather than competing for finite stocks, much of the material basis for conflict dissolves. More importantly, regenerative economies structure production around bioregional interdependence in ways that make cooperation dramatically more valuable than conflict. When each bioregion specializes in what it can produce most sustainably given its unique ecology and develops trade relationships of genuine reciprocity with other regions, attacking your trading partners becomes economically suicidal. If your solar panels depend on rare earth minerals from one region, your food security depends on agricultural products from regions with different climates, your clean water depends on the watershed stewardship practices of upstream communities, and your access to medicines depends on the biodiversity maintained in tropical forests, then you cannot harm any of these partners without directly harming yourself. This is not the fragile interdependence of current global supply chains, which concentrate production in exploited regions using the coercive power of debt and unequal exchange, creating resentment and instability. It is the robust reciprocity found in healthy ecosystems, where mutualistic relationships between diverse organisms create a whole that is stronger precisely because all parts need each other. In such a system, the traditional concept of national security through military dominance becomes incoherent. Real security comes from the health of your relationships and the resilience of the larger systems within which you are embedded. Beyond restructuring economic incentives, a regenerative civilization would invest heavily in what we might call peace infrastructure, the institutions and practices that prevent conflicts from arising and help communities transform conflicts constructively when they do emerge. Currently, most nations spend enormous resources on military infrastructure, weapons development, intelligence agencies, and the capacity to project violence, while investing comparatively trivial amounts in conflict prevention and transformation. This is economically irrational since preventing conflicts costs vastly less than fighting them, to say nothing of the moral dimension. Peace infrastructure would include abundant, easily accessible resources for mediation, dialogue facilitation, restorative justice, and trauma healing in every community. It would mean training large numbers of people in these practices so that conflict transformation skills are widely distributed rather than scarce specializations. It would mean building institutions specifically dedicated to addressing historical injustices and healing intergenerational wounds, recognizing that conflicts often have deep roots and past harms that continue to generate cycles of violence when left unaddressed. It would mean robust funding for mental health services, addiction treatment, youth programs, and community building initiatives that address the individual and social dysfunction that often underlies violent behavior. Peace infrastructure would also include programs that build relationships and shared purpose across national and cultural boundaries, particularly among young people. A universal youth Earth Corps could bring youth from around the world together to work on regeneration projects that benefit everyone, such as planting forests, restoring wetlands, building renewable energy infrastructure, or developing open-source technologies. When young people work side by side with peers from supposed enemy nations to accomplish something meaningful together, they form friendships and develop mutual respect that makes future conflict far less likely. They learn firsthand that people everywhere share the same fundamental hopes and needs, breaking down the dehumanizing stereotypes that make violence possible. Instead of creating professional militaries trained to see other humans as threats, we create generations of global citizens who have directly experienced the joy of cooperating across differences to heal the world they will inherit. Implementation. From vision to reality, the vision outlined here might seem impossibly ambitious or even utopian, but it is grounded in solid ecological science, proven organizational models, existing technologies, and the living wisdom of indigenous peoples who maintained sustainable civilizations for thousands of years. The question is not whether regenerative systems can work at human scales, Since we know they work at every scale in nature, the question is how to actually implement such a transformation given the enormous institutional inertia of existing power structures and the urgent timelines imposed by accelerating ecological breakdown. The most promising approach is to begin with pilot projects that demonstrate the full regenerative model in practice, while the larger society continues operating under current systems. We might start by establishing 1,000 regenerative villages around the world, each tailored to its specific bioregion but all sharing core principles of circular economics, cooperative governance, ecosystem regeneration, and open knowledge sharing. These communities would function as living laboratories where different approaches can be tested, refined, and proven. They would also serve as inspirational examples showing people everywhere that a different way of organizing human life is not just theoretically possible, but practically achievable and deeply satisfying. As these pilot communities develop, they would generate detailed documentation of what works, what challenges arise, and how to adapt the model for different ecological and cultural contexts. This knowledge would be shared freely through open-source platforms, allowing any community anywhere to begin implementing regenerative practices without needing to reinvent everything from scratch. The pilot communities would also develop training programs where people from other communities could come learn these practices through direct experience and then return home to catalyze transformation in their own places. Simultaneously, we need to work on transforming existing institutions from within and creating new enabling policies at larger scales. This includes redirecting sovereign wealth funds and central bank assets into investments that generate returns through ecosystem regeneration rather than extraction. It includes shifting tax policy to make destructive activities economically disadvantageous while subsidizing regenerative activities. It includes reforming education to focus on ecosystem restoration and community building rather than merely preparing workers for extractive industries. It includes creating legal frameworks that recognize the rights of ecosystems in future generations, constraining present actions that would foreclose possibilities for those who come after us. The transformation will not be uniform or linear. Different communities and regions will move at different paces depending on their circumstances, values, and political possibilities. This diversity is actually valuable, as it allows for experimentation and learning across multiple contexts, while ensuring that no single point of failure can derail the entire transition. What matters is that enough communities in enough places begin demonstrating that regenerative approaches actually deliver better outcomes for human well-being and ecological health, creating positive examples that inspire others to follow. Measuring success. What truly matters? How will we know if this transformation is succeeding? Current metrics like GDP are worse than useless because they count destructive activities as economic growth and ignore most of what actually matters for human flourishing. We need new ways of measuring progress that reflect genuine well-being. This means tracking biodiversity levels across different ecosystems, celebrating when species populations grow and new species colonize restored habitats, rather than merely slowing the rate of extinction. It means monitoring soil health indicators like carbon content, biological activity, water retention capacity, and nutrient availability, recognizing that building soil is one of the most important forms of wealth creation we can engage in. It means tracking the health of watersheds through indicators like water quality, stream flow patterns, aquifer levels, and the populations of indicator species like salmon or freshwater mussels whose presence signals healthy aquatic ecosystems. It means measuring community well-being through factors like social cohesion, sense of purpose, experience of joy, mental health indicators, and direct surveys of life satisfaction, rather than assuming that income serves as an adequate proxy for well-being. It means monitoring the knowledge commons by tracking how much useful information, technology, and cultural wisdom is freely accessible to everyone rather than enclosed behind paywalls and patents. It means tracking our success at resolving conflicts constructively by measuring rates of restorative justice participation, reductions in violence and incarceration, and the effectiveness of mediation and dialogue processes. It means paying attention to children's relationships with nature, since a generation that grows up swimming in clean rivers, climbing fruit trees, learning from elders, and understanding themselves as part of the living earth will create a very different civilization than a generation raised in climate-controlled boxes staring at screens. It means honoring elders by measuring their satisfaction with life and the degree to which their wisdom is valued and integrated into community decision-making. Together, these metrics would give us a comprehensive picture of whether our civilization is genuinely regenerating or merely sustaining its current dysfunction. A practical utopianism. The transformation described here might seem impossibly ambitious, yet it is far more realistic than continuing on our current trajectory. which leads inevitably to ecological collapse and civilizational breakdown. We face a choice between utopian thinking that reimagines human possibility and fatalistic acceptance of a dystopian future that grows more certain with each passing year. The regenerative civilization outlined here is not a fantasy but a practical synthesis of indigenous wisdom, ecological science, proven organizational models, and existing technologies. Every element described exists somewhere in the world today. The task is to integrate these elements into coherent systems at sufficient scale to transform human civilization before irreversible ecological tipping points foreclose the possibility. More importantly, this transformation offers not merely survival but the possibility of genuine flourishing for all life. Imagine a world where economic success means more birdsong, where innovation is measured by how well it integrates with natural systems, where security comes from thriving communities and healthy ecosystems rather than from military dominance and locked doors. Imagine cities as food forests, buildings as living organisms, work as ecosystem restoration, education as apprenticeship in the regeneration of the world. Imagine children growing up knowing they are part of an intelligent, living planet that celebrates diversity and creativity, that they inherit not a degraded world to endure but a healing world to participate in nurturing. This world is achievable, but only if we act with the urgency the moment demands and the wisdom the earth has been teaching us all along. The rainforest has been demonstrating for eons how to create abundant, resilient, beautiful systems that regenerate rather than degrade their foundation. It is time we paid attention to that teaching and applied it to the great work of transforming human civilization. The alternative is to continue down a path that everyone knows leads to catastrophe, and that, far more than any vision of regeneration, is the truly unrealistic option. Rainforest economy, building a regenerative civilization, the core vision. The rainforest serves as the perfect metaphor and model for a sustainable civilization because it demonstrates how complex systems can become more abundant, diverse, and resilient over time. Unlike extractive economic systems that deplete resources and create scarcity, rainforests actually generate more life, more complexity, and more resources the longer they exist. They achieve this through cooperation rather than competition, with every organism contributing to the health of the whole ecosystem while simultaneously thriving itself. This document explores how we might design human civilization using these same principles to create genuine sustainability, regeneration, and lasting peace. Economic foundation. Circular bioeconomy. The foundation of a rainforest economy begins with transforming our linear, take-make-waste model into circular systems that mirror nature's approach to resources. In a rainforest, nothing is wasted because every output from one organism becomes valuable input for another organism or process. We can apply this same principle to human economic activity by designing industrial and agricultural systems where waste simply doesn't exist in the traditional sense. Agricultural waste can feed energy production systems through biogas generation or biomass combustion. The byproducts of those energy systems, such as ash-rich in minerals or composted organic matter, can return nutrients to farming systems. Manufacturing processes can be redesigned so that every material either biodegrades safely back into natural cycles or can be perpetually recycled into new products. This creates closed loops that eliminate pollution while generating continuous value, allowing economic activity to regenerate rather than degrade the natural systems on which all life depends. Regenerative value, accounting our current measure of economic success, gross domestic product, fails to distinguish between activities that build genuine wealth and those that destroy it. A forest being clear-cut increases GDP, as does the medical treatment for pollution-induced illness, yet both represent the destruction of actual wealth. We need to redefine economic value to measure what truly matters for human and ecological well-being. This means tracking ecosystem health indicators like biodiversity levels, soil fertility, clean water availability, and forest coverage. It means measuring social cohesion through factors like community trust, voluntary cooperation rates, and the strength of social safety nets. It means assessing human well-being directly through health outcomes, educational attainment, creative expression, and reported life satisfaction. It also means valuing the knowledge commons by measuring how much useful information, technology, and cultural wisdom is freely accessible to everyone. In this system, companies and communities would earn credits and recognition not just for profit generation, but for actively restoring damaged ecosystems, building community resilience, and openly sharing innovations that help others thrive. Mycelial finance networks. The financial architecture of a regenerative civilization would function more like the mycelial networks that connect trees in a forest than like today's extractive banking systems. Mycelial fungi create vast underground networks that transfer transfer nutrients from areas of abundance to areas of need, helping the entire forest ecosystem thrive. They connect diverse species, facilitate communication, and ensure that resources flow to support healthy growth throughout the system. We can create financial systems that operate on similar principles through decentralized, community-owned cooperative banks and credit unions that prioritize serving real economic needs over maximizing returns for distant shareholders. These institutions would be interconnected in networks that allow capital to flow efficiently from communities with surplus to communities with productive opportunities. But governance would remain local and accountable to the people using these financial services. By designing finance to mimic mycelial networks, we ensure that money functions as a tool for nourishing healthy economic activity throughout society, rather than concentrating in isolated pools of speculative wealth. Social architecture nested cooperative networks. Human organizations in a rainforest economy would be structured like the layers of a rainforest canopy, with each level having its own character and function, while contributing to the health of the whole system. At the ground level, local worker cooperatives, housing cooperatives, and community land trusts would give people direct democratic control over their economic lives. These local cooperatives would connect with others in their region to form networks that can share resources, coordinate larger projects, and provide mutual support during challenges. Regional networks would then connect to bioregional systems organized around natural watershed and ecosystem boundaries rather than arbitrary political borders, allowing human governance to align with ecological reality. At the broadest level, bioregional systems would maintain global coordination bodies to address planetary challenges and facilitate knowledge sharing across the entire human family. Critically, each layer in this nested structure would maintain genuine autonomy in its own sphere while remaining interconnected with and accountable to the other layers, creating resilience through distributed decision-making while enabling coordination at whatever scale is appropriate for each challenge. Universal basic ecology. One of the most transformative elements of a regenerative civilization would be decoupling human survival from participation in extractive or degrading activities. Universal basic ecology provides everyone with access to fundamental resources including housing, nutritious food, healthcare, and education, but ties this baseline security to contribution toward ecosystem regeneration rather than to employment in the traditional sense. People could fulfill this obligation through diverse activities including rewilding degraded lands, planting and tending forests, restoring wetlands and waterways, caring for community members who need support, creating art and culture that nourishes the human spirit, conducting research, developing open-source technologies, or teaching and sharing knowledge. This approach recognizes that many of the most valuable contributions to a thriving civilization are not captured by market transactions, while simultaneously ensuring that human economic activity actively heals rather than harms the living planet. By guaranteeing survival needs, we also free people to take creative risks, pursue genuine innovation, and organize their communities in experimental ways without fear that failure means destitution. Wisdom councils in digital democracy. Governance in a rainforest economy would blend the deep time-tested wisdom of indigenous knowledge, keeping traditions with the unprecedented coordination capabilities of modern digital technology and artificial intelligence. Major decisions would emerge from extensive community dialogue that deliberately seeks to include diverse voices and perspectives, particularly those of elders and indigenous peoples whose cultures have maintained sustainable relationships with their ecosystems for thousands of years. This dialogue would be informed by real-time data about ecosystem health, resource flows, social well-being indicators, and the likely long-term consequences of different choices. AI systems could help translate between languages and cultural frameworks, identify areas of unexpected agreement, surface creative solutions that bridge seemingly opposed positions, and model the complex systemic effects of proposed policies. However, the AI would function as a tool to enhance human wisdom rather than replace human judgment, and final authority would always rest with the diverse human communities affected by each decision. This approach combines the relational wisdom and moral reasoning that humans excel at with the pattern recognition and systems modeling capabilities where AI can augment our capacities. Technological integration. Biomimetic infrastructure. The built environment of a regenerative civilization would be designed to function as living organisms that actively contribute to ecosystem health, rather than as inert structures that require constant energy input. Buildings would incorporate living walls and green roofs that photosynthesize to produce oxygen, sequester carbon, cool the air through evapotranspiration, and provide habitat for birds, insects, and other urban wildlife. Water systems would be designed to purify and filter water through constructed wetlands and living machines that use plants, bacteria, and natural processes rather than energy-intensive chemical treatment. Transportation infrastructure could incorporate flowering plants along routes to provide pollinator corridors, while the vehicles themselves could be designed to disperse native seeds or deposit nutrients as they move through the landscape. Streets and parking areas could use permeable surfaces that allow water infiltration and support root systems, rather than creating dead zones that generate toxic runoff. In essence, every piece of infrastructure would be asked to do multiple jobs, providing human services while simultaneously healing damaged ecosystems and creating habitat for the more than human world. Open source everything knowledge and technology would be treated as commons belonging to all humanity, rather than as private property to be enclosed and exploited for profit. All essential technologies including clean energy systems, water purification methods, sustainable food production techniques, healthcare treatments and devices, and educational platforms would be developed and shared as open source resources that anyone can access, use, modify, and improve. This approach recognizes that innovation accelerates dramatically when knowledge flows freely, as each improvement builds on all previous improvements and diverse minds can contribute creative adaptations for different contexts. Making essential technologies freely available also ensures that solutions to fundamental human needs can spread rapidly to communities everywhere regardless of their ability to pay monopoly prices for patented technologies. The open source approach mirrors how nutrients and information flow freely through mycelial networks in healthy soils, enabling robust life throughout the ecosystem rather than concentrated abundance in isolated pockets. AI as ecosystem guardian. Artificial intelligence in a rainforest economy would be deployed not to maximize corporate profit or state control, but to serve as what we might call digital mycorrhizae, enhancing the health and coherence of the larger living system. AI could help translate between human languages and potentially even help us better understand the communication of other species through their vocalizations, chemical signals, and behavioral patterns. These systems could monitor ecosystem health across vast scales, detecting early warning signs of stress or imbalance, and alerting human communities to respond before small problems become crises. AI could optimize resource flows throughout economic networks, identifying where surplus exists and where scarcity threatens well-being, then suggesting efficient pathways to balance supply and need. Perhaps most importantly, AI could help humans practice seven-generation thinking by modeling the long-term consequences of our choices and helping us understand how today's decisions will ripple through complex systems to affect our descendants and the more than human world far into the future. By designing AI as a guardian and partner rather than as a tool for exploitation, we can harness its capabilities to enhance our wisdom rather than amplify our worst impulses. Peace infrastructure. Bioregional interdependence. Lasting peace becomes much more achievable when economic systems are structured to make cooperation more profitable than conflict. By organizing specialized production around bioregional strengths and creating deep interdependence between regions, we make war economically irrational in the same way that species and symbiotic relationships cannot harm their partners without harming themselves. A region that specializes in producing solar panels using its abundant rare earth minerals depends on other regions for clean water, for food production that suits different climates, for unique medicines derived from biodiversity hotspots, and for cultural innovations and scientific discoveries that emerge from diverse human communities. When your erstwhile competitor is actually the source of your clean water or the rare minerals essential for your renewable energy infrastructure, attacking them becomes an act of self-sabotage. This interdependence is not the fragile kind created by exploitative global supply chains, but rather the robust reciprocity found in healthy ecosystems, where diversity and specialization create resilience precisely because all parts need each other to thrive. Conflict transformation commons. If we invest as heavily in peace infrastructure as most nations currently invest in military infrastructure, we can dramatically reduce the frequency and severity of violent conflict. This means creating abundant, easily accessible resources for conflict mediation and restorative justice processes in every community. It means training large numbers of people in dialogue facilitation, nonviolent communication, and trauma healing so these skills are widely distributed rather than scarce specialties. It means building institutions specifically dedicated to addressing historical injustices and healing intergenerational wounds that otherwise perpetuate cycles of violence. It means funding robust mental health services, addiction treatment, and community building programs that address the root causes of violence, rather than only responding punitively after harm has occurred. Peace requires infrastructure every bit as much as war does, but we have habitually invested in the latter while neglecting the former. A regenerative civilization would reverse those priorities, recognizing that preventing conflict is far more cost-effective and humane than managing its aftermath. Youth Earthcore, one of the most powerful paths to lasting peace is building genuine relationships and shared purpose among young people from different nations before they can be mobilized into nationalist conflicts. A universal service program could bring youth from around the world together to work on regeneration projects that benefit everyone, such as planting vast forests to sequester carbon and restore biodiversity, cleaning polluted waterways and restoring wetlands, building renewable energy infrastructure in communities that need it, or developing open-source technologies for sustainable living. When young people work side by side with peers from supposed enemy nations to accomplish something meaningful together, they form friendships and develop mutual respect that makes future conflict much less likely. They also learn firsthand that people everywhere share the same fundamental hopes and needs, breaking down the dehumanizing stereotypes that make violence possible. Instead of creating professional militaries trained to see other humans as threats, we create generations of global citizens who have directly experienced the joy of cooperating across differences to heal the world they will inherit. Implementation pathways start with 1,000 regenerative villages rather than attempting to transform entire nations overnight. We can begin by establishing 1,000 pilot communities around the world that demonstrate the full regenerative model in practice. Each village would be tailored to its specific bioregion, working with local ecosystems and cultural contexts rather than imposing a one-size-fits-all template. However, they would all share the core principles of circular economics, cooperative governance, ecosystem regeneration, and open knowledge sharing. These communities would function as living laboratories where we can test different approaches, learn from both successes and failures, and develop proven models that can be adapted for wider implementation. They would also serve as inspirational examples, showing people everywhere that a different way of organizing human life is not just theoretically possible, but practically achievable and deeply satisfying. As these regenerative villages thrive and demonstrate superior outcomes for human well-being and ecological health, the model will naturally spread as more communities choose to transform themselves using these tested approaches. Sovereign wealth for planetary wealth. Many nations have accumulated sovereign wealth funds, and central banks hold vast stores of assets that are currently invested in conventional financial instruments. These massive pools of capital could be redirected into investments that generate returns through ecosystem regeneration rather than through extraction or exploitation. Carbon sequestration bonds could pay returns based on verified increases in forest coverage and soil carbon levels. Biodiversity credits could reward landholders for increasing species populations and habitat quality. Clean water futures could create financial value tied to watershed restoration and aquifer replenishment. By creating financial instruments that align profit with genuine ecological improvement, we can mobilize enormous amounts of capital toward regeneration while still providing the financial returns that fund pensions, public services, and economic stability. This transforms the financial system from an engine of ecological destruction into a powerful tool for planetary healing. The Great Redistribution, the transition to a regenerative economy, requires a fundamental shift in what we tax and what we subsidize. Activities that extract non-renewable resources, generate pollution, concentrate wealth in ways that undermine social cohesion, or degrade ecosystems should face heavy taxation that reflects their true cost to society and future generations. The revenue from these taxes would fund generous subsidies for activities that regenerate ecosystems, improve public health, create educational opportunities, build affordable housing, develop clean energy infrastructure, and strengthen community bonds. This shift in incentives would make destructive activities economically disadvantageous while making regenerative activities financially attractive, allowing market forces to work in service of ecological and social health rather than against it. The redistribution also addresses the reality that current wealth concentrations largely reflect historical injustices and the enclosure of commons that once belonged to everyone. So redistributing that wealth toward collective benefit and ecosystem restoration is both practically necessary and morally appropriate. Education revolution. Schools in a regenerative civilization would be transformed from institutions focused primarily on preparing workers for the industrial economy into regeneration academies, where children learn by actively participating in healing their local ecosystems and communities. Students would spend significant time planting and tending food forests, restoring degraded lands, monitoring watershed health, caring for animals, and learning traditional ecological knowledge from elders alongside cutting-edge sustainability science. They would learn academic subjects and context through these hands-on projects, mathematics through ecosystem monitoring and permaculture design, science through observing and interacting with living systems, writing through documenting their observations and telling the stories of their places, social studies through understanding how their community fits into larger regional and global patterns. Most importantly, children would grow up understanding themselves as members of the living Earth community with both rights and responsibilities, developing direct relationships with the land, water, plants, and animals that sustain all life. This education creates not just knowledgeable individuals but wise participants in the regeneration of the world. Success metrics progress toward a regenerative civilization would be measured through indicators that reflect genuine well-being rather than mere economic activity. We would track biodiversity increase rates across different ecosystems, celebrating when species populations grow and new species colonize restored habitats. We would monitor soil carbon levels and overall soil health, recognizing that living soil is the foundation of terrestrial life and that building soil is one of the most important forms of wealth creation. Clean water availability and the health of watersheds would be key indicators, as water is life and watershed health reflects the overall condition of landscapes. Community well-being indices would measure factors like social connection, sense of purpose, experience of joy, and satisfaction with life rather than just income levels. We would track the growth of knowledge commons by measuring how much useful information, technology, and cultural wisdom is freely accessible to everyone. Conflict resolution success rates would tell us whether we are becoming better at addressing differences without violence. Children's relationships with nature would indicate whether we are raising generations who understand themselves as part of the living world. Elder satisfaction and cultural continuity would show whether we are honoring the wisdom of those who came before while adapting creatively to new circumstances. Together, these metrics would give us a comprehensive picture of whether our civilization is truly regenerating or merely sustaining itself. The North Star ultimately, we are working toward a civilization where economic success is measured by increasing birdsong rather than increasing GDP, where innovation is judged by how well it integrates human activity with natural systems rather than how thoroughly it dominates and controls nature. We seek a world where security comes not from military might or locked doors, but from knowing that your neighbors in your watershed are thriving, creating genuine safety through shared abundance rather than through threat of punishment. We imagine a future where every child grows up swimming in clean rivers, climbing fruit trees and food forests, learning from elders who carry ancient wisdom, and understanding that they are part of an intelligent, living planet that celebrates creativity and diversity. This is not a utopian fantasy but a practical possibility grounded in ecological science, tested through indigenous wisdom, and achievable through the technologies and organizational forms we already possess. The question is not whether we can create such a civilization, but whether we will choose to do so before ecological breakdown forecloses the option. Regenerative terraforming, extending the rainforest economy to other worlds, the ethics and ecology of planetary transformation. Terraforming other planets using regenerative principles represents both an extraordinary technical challenge and a profound opportunity to apply everything we learn from healing Earth to new worlds. However, we must begin with a critical ethical foundation that the rainforest economy demands. We should only consider terraforming lifeless planets, or those where we can be absolutely certain we won't be destroying existing life, no matter how microbial or exotic. The regenerative approach recognizes all life as intrinsically valuable and views ourselves as participants in a community of life rather than as masters entitled to reshape worlds at will. This ethical framework actually expands rather than constrains our possibilities, because Mars, Venus, and many moons in our solar system appear to be lifeless or could be transformed in ways that create rather than destroy biospheres. The question becomes not how can we dominate new worlds, but rather how can we midwife new living systems into existence using the same cooperative, regenerative principles that create thriving ecosystems on Earth, Mars. Building soil on the red planet Mars presents the most accessible terraforming opportunity in our solar system, but conventional approaches often imagine industrial-scale geoengineering projects that mirror the extractive thinking that created Earth's ecological crisis. A regenerative approach would be fundamentally different, starting with the recognition that you cannot have a living planet without living soil, and you cannot create living soil through purely mechanical or chemical means. The regenerative terraforming of Mars would begin with extensive robotic preparation that creates the conditions for life rather than attempting to directly engineer a breathable atmosphere through brute force. The first phase would involve establishing networks of small, sealed biomes scattered across Mars that function as seed banks and nurseries for the planetary transformation to come. These initial habitats would focus obsessively on building soil using the principles that work on Earth, combining mineral substrates with organic matter and microbial life in the presence of water in appropriate temperature conditions. Martian regolith could be mixed with organic matter imported from Earth or produced within the habitats through composting. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria, mycorrhizal fungi, and decomposer organisms would be introduced to begin creating the biological activity that distinguishes living soil from sterile dirt. These early soils would be used to grow increasingly hardy plants, with each generation of plant growth and decomposition building more complex soil ecosystems. The key insight is that soil itself is a living system, not merely a growing medium, and creating robust soil ecosystems must precede any attempt to establish larger biomes. As soil building progresses within protected environments, the next phase would involve releasing carefully selected extremophile organisms into the Martian environment itself. Cyanobacteria and lichens that can survive in Mars-like conditions would be deployed across vast areas, particularly in regions where subsurface ice exists. These organisms would begin the slow work of weathering rock, fixing nitrogen from the thin atmosphere, and creating the first organic layers on the Martian surface. This mirrors how life first colonized Earth's barren continents, with microbial mats and lichens preparing the way for more complex ecosystems. Simultaneously, we would work on atmospheric modification, but through biological means rather than industrial ones. Deliberately releasing greenhouse gases to warm Mars is often proposed, but a regenerative approach would prefer biological solutions. As photosynthetic organisms spread across Mars, they would gradually increase atmospheric oxygen while drawing down carbon dioxide and helping to thicken the atmosphere through the release of various gases from their metabolic processes. This is slower than industrial approaches but creates a more stable, self-regulating system that doesn't depend on continued technological intervention. The water ice locked in Mars' polar caps and subsurface deposits would be gradually mobilized through warming and channeled into developing watersheds. Here, the regenerative principle of letting water do the work becomes crucial. Rather than engineering elaborate irrigation systems, we would establish the conditions for natural hydrological cycles to emerge, with water flowing through landscapes that have been prepared with appropriate vegetation and soil to capture and hold it. Wetlands would be among the first terrestrial ecosystems established, as they excel at water retention, nutrient cycling, and supporting biodiversity. Venus, the long transformation through biological engineering. Venus presents a far more challenging prospect than Mars, with surface temperatures hot enough to melt lead, crushing atmospheric pressure, and sulfuric acid clouds. Conventional terraforming proposals often involve truly massive geoengineering projects like installing giant orbital mirrors or bombarding the planet with asteroids to alter its rotation. A regenerative approach would be more patient and would rely on biology's extraordinary capacity to transform environments over time. The transformation of Venus would likely begin in its upper atmosphere, where temperature and pressure conditions are surprisingly Earth-like. Floating aerostats containing carefully designed microbial ecosystems could be released into the Venusian cloud layer. These organisms would be engineered to survive in sulfuric acid clouds while metabolizing sulfur compounds and carbon dioxide, gradually altering the atmospheric chemistry. This mirrors how cyanobacteria transformed Earth's atmosphere billions of years ago, though we would be deliberately guiding the process based on our understanding of what needs to change. These atmospheric microbes would reproduce and spread, creating ever larger populations that process increasing amounts of atmospheric gases. Over centuries or millennia, their metabolic activity could begin reducing atmospheric pressure, lowering surface temperatures, and eliminating the sulfuric acid clouds. As conditions improve, increasingly complex organisms could be introduced, with the eventual goal of creating floating forests in the upper atmosphere similar to proposals for cloud cities, but biological rather than purely technological. The transformation of Venus's surface would require the most patience, as it cannot seriously begin until atmospheric conditions moderate substantially. However, As the atmosphere slowly transforms, we could begin establishing extremophile ecosystems at high-altitude locations where conditions become tolerable first. These organisms would begin the work of weathering rock and building soil, preparing for the eventual establishment of terrestrial ecosystems once temperature and pressure allow. Water would need to be imported to Venus through controlled comet impacts and later stages of terraforming, once surface conditions have cooled sufficiently that the water won't simply boil away into space. This represents one area where massive technological intervention seems unavoidable, but the regenerative approach would minimize such interventions and rely primarily on biological transformation wherever possible. Titan and Europa, supporting exotic biochemistries. Saturn's moon Titan and Jupiter's moon Europa represent fascinating opportunities to support radically different forms of life rather than remaking worlds in Earth's image. Titan has a thick atmosphere and liquid hydrocarbon lakes, while Europa likely harbors a subsurface ocean beneath its ice shell. Both may already harbor exotic life, so any intervention must proceed with extreme caution and prioritize discovery and support over transformation. If Titan proves lifeless, we might consider introducing extremophile organisms specifically adapted to survive in liquid methane and ethane rather than water. This would require significant synthetic biology to create organisms with fundamentally different biochemistry, but it honors the principle of working with rather than against the conditions of each world. The goal would be to establish self-sustaining ecosystems that thrive in Titan's exotic environment rather than attempting to remake Titan into an Earth analog. Europa's subsurface ocean, if lifeless, could potentially be seeded with extremophile organisms adapted to high-pressure, lightless conditions. These would be similar to organisms that inhabit Earth's deep ocean trenches and subsurface aquifers. However, accessing Europa's ocean without contaminating it requires technological solutions we are still developing. The regenerative principle here is patience and caution, recognizing that rushing to transform Europa could destroy evidence of native life or unique chemical processes we should study and preserve. Closed-loop space habitats, rainforest principles and microcosm. Perhaps the most immediate application of regenerative principles to space is in the design of closed-loop habitats for space stations and generation ships. Current life support systems on spacecraft are highly technological and require constant resupply from Earth. A regenerative approach would create miniature ecosystems that function more like rainforests, with biological systems handling air renewal, water purification, waste recycling, and food production. These space habitats would be designed as layered ecosystems with multiple species filling different niches, creating redundancy and resilience. Photosynthetic organisms would range from algae to crop plants to fruit trees, each contributing to oxygen production and carbon dioxide absorption while providing nutrition. Aquatic systems with fish, aquatic plants, and filtration organisms would purify water while producing protein. Composting systems with specific decomposer organisms would process organic waste and return nutrients to growing systems. Mycorrhizal fungi would extend the nutrient-gathering capacity of plant roots while building soil structure. The key is creating systems complex enough to be self-regulating and resilient to disturbances, but contained enough to manage within the strict mass and volume constraints of spacecraft. This requires sophisticated understanding of ecosystem dynamics and careful selection of organisms that fill multiple functional roles. It also requires moving away from the sterile, mechanistic aesthetic of current spacecraft toward embracing controlled wilderness as the life support system itself. These closed-loop habitats would become living laboratories for regenerative principles, teaching us how to create minimal-input ecosystems that sustain human life while maintaining their own health. The lessons learned would apply both to terraforming projects and to creating more sustainable systems on Earth. There is a beautiful reciprocity here. The effort to create regenerative systems for space helps us understand how to heal Earth, while healing Earth teaches us how to green the cosmos. Governance for multiplanetary civilization. As humanity expands to other worlds, the governance principles of the rainforest economy become even more crucial. We must avoid replicating the colonial dynamics that have caused such harm on Earth, where distant powers exploited resources and peoples without accountability to those affected. Each planetary or lunar settlement should have genuine autonomy over its own affairs, while participating in solar system-wide coordination for challenges that transcend individual worlds. The nested cooperative structure described for Earth scales beautifully to a multiplanetary civilization. Local settlements govern themselves democratically. Multiple settlements on the same world coordinate through planetary councils. Different worlds coordinate through solar system-wide assemblies that address questions of resource sharing, technology development, scientific research, and conflict resolution. Power flows from the local level upward rather than being imposed from above, and decisions are made at the most local level capable of handling each issue. Resource extraction from lifeless asteroids and moons could be managed as commons belonging to all humanity, rather than being claimed by whatever private entity arrives first. The resources of the solar system are vast enough that there's no need for the artificial scarcity that drives conflict on Earth, but only if we organize extraction and distribution cooperatively rather than competitively. This abundance, managed through the regenerative principles of fair distribution and circular use, could help stabilize peace both on Earth and throughout human inhabited space. Technology development, open source space exploration and settlement have historically been dominated by national governments and increasingly by private corporations. But a regenerative approach would democratize access to space through open source technology development. All technologies for launch systems, life support, habitat construction, propulsion, and terraforming should be developed openly with knowledge shared freely among all who wish to participate in the expansion of life beyond Earth. This open source approach would accelerate innovation by allowing diverse minds and communities to contribute improvements and adaptations. It would prevent the concentration of control over space resources and technologies that could create problematic power dynamics. It would ensure that the benefits of space expansion flow to all humanity rather than being captured by narrow interests. Most importantly, it embodies the regenerative principle that knowledge and capabilities should circulate freely like nutrients in healthy soil, nourishing robust growth throughout the system. Regenerative terraforming requires accepting timescales that humble human ambition. Transforming Mars into a fully habitable world might take thousands of years through biological methods, compared to optimistic projections of centuries through industrial geoengineering. Venus could require tens of thousands of years. These timelines seem impossibly long from the perspective of quarterly earnings reports or political election cycles, but they are entirely appropriate from the perspective of creating stable, self-sustaining biospheres that will endure for millions of years once established. The regenerative approach values doing things correctly over doing them quickly. It recognizes that rushing the process through brute force technological intervention creates fragile systems that require constant maintenance and are vulnerable to cascade failures. Biological systems that slowly transform themselves into stability are far more resilient and far more likely to persist without constant human intervention. This patience is not passivity, but rather the wisdom to work with natural processes rather than against them. Moreover, the slow pace of biological terraforming provides time to ensure we are making ethical choices, to learn from our inevitable mistakes on a small scale before they become planetary catastrophes, and to develop the wisdom necessary to be responsible stewards of new biospheres. Humanity's track record of environmental management on Earth should inspire humility about our ability to successfully engineer entire planetary ecosystems, suggesting that patience and biological approaches may be not just more elegant but more likely to succeed. The ultimate vision, a solar system of gardens. The goal of regenerative terraforming is not to create a second Earth or to establish human dominance over lifeless worlds. It is to midwife new biospheres into existence, creating a diversity of living worlds that each express the unique possibilities of their particular conditions. Mars might become a world of vast wetlands and seasonal forests adapted to low gravity and high radiation. Venus might eventually support floating ecosystems in its clouds and, after millennia, temperate forests across its continents. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn might harbor exotic ecosystems based on different biochemistries entirely. These new biospheres would not exist merely to serve human needs, but would be valued as expressions of life's creativity and diversity. Humans would live within them as participating members of their ecosystems, rather than as external engineers continually manipulating them. This represents a fundamental shift from the extractive mindset that treats planets as resources to exploit toward a regenerative mindset that sees humans as gardeners helping life flourish in new contexts. The knowledge and wisdom gained from creating these new biospheres would flow back to inform our healing of Earth. The cooperative governance structures developed for multiplanetary civilization would help transform our political systems at home. The technologies created for closed-loop space habitats would help us design more sustainable cities on Earth. The very act of working together across national boundaries to green the cosmos would help transcend the divisions that fuel conflict here. In this vision, the expansion of life beyond Earth becomes not an escape from our responsibilities here but rather an extension of the great work of regeneration. We learn to be worthy participants in the community of life on Earth by practicing those same principles as we help life take root among the stars. The rainforest economy scales from garden to planet to solar system, demonstrating at every level that cooperation, diversity, and regeneration create more beautiful and abundant worlds than competition, monoculture, and extraction ever could. The peace economy, how regenerative systems create lasting harmony. Understanding the deep connections between peace, ecology, and economics. Global peace has eluded humanity throughout recorded history, not because humans are inherently violent or because conflict is inevitable, but because we have organized our societies around systems that structurally generate competition, scarcity, and inequality. Most wars are fought over resources, territory, or perceived threats to survival. Most violence emerges from desperation, humiliation, trauma, or the dehumanization that occurs when people see others as obstacles to their own well-being, rather than as fellow participants in shared systems. The profound insight of the rainforest economy is that these conditions are not fixed features of reality, but rather consequences of how we have chosen to organize ourselves, and they can be transformed by organizing differently. A rainforest creates peace among its inhabitants not through enforcement or top-down control, but through establishing conditions where cooperation yields better outcomes than conflict for every participant. When resources flow abundantly, when diversity is valued rather than threatening, when the success of your neighbors enhances rather than diminishes your own prospects, then violence becomes economically irrational and cooperation becomes the natural strategy. The task before humanity is to design our economic, social, and political systems to create these same conditions at global scale, transforming the structural drivers of conflict into structural drivers of peace. Eliminating scarcity, the foundation of peace. The first and most fundamental step toward global peace is eliminating the artificial scarcity that drives most conflict. We live on a planet with sufficient resources to provide every human being with comfortable material security, yet billions live in poverty while small minorities control vast wealth. This scarcity is not natural or inevitable but is actively created through systems of enclosure, hoarding, and unequal exchange. Land that could grow food is held vacant for speculation. Food that could feed the hungry is destroyed to maintain prices. Housing sits empty while people sleep on streets. Knowledge that could solve problems is locked behind paywalls and patents. The scarcity that drives so much conflict is artificial, maintained by systems that concentrate wealth and power. A regenerative economy eliminates artificial scarcity by establishing universal access to fundamental needs as an unconditional right of existence. Every human being receives secure access to nutritious food, clean water, safe housing, healthcare, education, and the means to participate meaningfully in their community. This baseline security is not charity, but rather recognition that these are preconditions for any human to develop their capacities and contribute to collective flourishing. When survival is guaranteed, people become free from the desperate competition that fuels so much violence. They can make choices based on what genuinely serves well-being rather than merely what enables survival. This universal security is made economically feasible through several complementary mechanisms. First, by organizing production cooperatively rather than extractively, far more value remains in communities rather than being siphoned to distant shareholders, providing resources for collective provision. Second, by making essential technologies open source commons, the cost of meeting basic needs falls dramatically as communities can freely adopt best practices without paying monopoly prices. Third, by designing circular economic systems that eliminate waste and pollution, we stop destroying value that must then be expensively replaced or mitigated. Fourth, by redirecting the enormous resources currently spent on military systems toward meeting human needs, we discover we already have more than enough to ensure everyone's material security. When people know their survival needs will be met regardless of circumstance, several transformations occur simultaneously. The desperation that drives much crime and violence diminishes. People become more willing to take risks on education, entrepreneurship, and creative expression rather than clinging to exploitative but secure employment. Communities can invest in long-term projects that pay off over generations rather than requiring immediate returns. Mental health improves as the chronic stress of precarity lifts. Social trust increases as people no longer view others primarily as competitors for scarce resources. These changes compound over time, creating upward spirals toward greater peace and well-being. Bioregional interdependence, making cooperation more profitable than conflict. The second essential element for lasting peace is restructuring economic relationships to create genuine interdependence between regions and peoples. Current global trade often creates exploitative relationships where wealthy regions extract resources and labor from poor regions through mechanisms like debt, unequal exchange, and political pressure. This generates justified resentment and creates power imbalances that fuel conflict. Even when trade is somewhat more equitable, it often homogenizes production, creating competition rather than complementarity between regions. A regenerative economy organizes production around bioregional specialization in ways that create robust reciprocity. Each bioregion focuses on producing what it can grow or make most sustainably given its unique ecology, culture, and resources, while developing trading relationships with diverse partners who produce complementary goods and services. A region blessed with abundant solar energy specializes in clean energy production and energy-intensive manufacturing. A region with vast forest focuses on sustainable timber, forest products, and carbon sequestration. A region with rich agricultural land emphasizes food production. A region with unique biodiversity develops pharmaceutical and biotechnology industries based on that biological wealth. A region with deep cultural traditions and particular crafts becomes the source for those unique products. Crucially, no region is self-sufficient, and each region depends on diverse partners rather than having a single dominant relationship. This creates network resilience where losing any single trading partner does not threaten collapse, while simultaneously making conflict with any partner damaging to one's own interests. When your clean energy infrastructure depends on rare earth minerals from one region, your food security relies on agricultural production from regions with different climates, your medicines derive from biodiversity conserved in tropical forests elsewhere, and your access to certain technologies depends on the innovations of communities around the world, then you cannot harm any of these partners without directly harming yourself. This interdependence differs fundamentally from the fragile global supply chains that currently exist. Today's supply chains concentrate production to minimize costs while maximizing control, creating single points of failure in exploitative relationships. Regenerative interdependence distributes production to optimize for sustainability and resilience, while ensuring all participants benefit equitably from the relationships. It mirrors the mutualistic relationships found in healthy ecosystems, where diverse organisms depend on each other in ways that make the whole system more robust precisely because no part can thrive alone. The implications for peace are profound. War becomes economically suicidal when waging it means losing access to essential resources that only your erstwhile enemy can provide. Military aggression becomes irrational when the most reliable path to prosperity is cooperation rather than domination. National security comes to mean ensuring the health and stability of your trading partners rather than maintaining the capacity to threaten them. This doesn't eliminate all sources of conflict, but it removes the material and strategic incentives that drive most wars. Distributed sovereignty and subsidiarity, governance that honors diversity. The third essential element for peace is transforming how we organize governance and sovereignty to honor the extraordinary diversity of human cultures, values, and aspirations while maintaining cooperation at larger scales when necessary. Much conflict arises from attempts to impose uniform governance on diverse peoples, from the suppression of cultural autonomy, and from resentment at distant powers making decisions that profoundly affect local communities without meaningful local input. The principle of subsidiarity holds that decisions should always be made at the most local level capable of handling them well, with broader levels of governance only addressing questions that genuinely require coordination across larger scales. A regenerative civilization applies this principle rigorously. Local communities have full authority over their own affairs, their land use, their economic organization, their cultural practices, and their daily governance. Regional bodies coordinate matters that affect multiple communities, such as watershed management, transportation networks, and regional economic development. Bioregional organizations address questions that span entire ecosystems, like habitat restoration, climate adaptation, and resource sharing. Global bodies only govern truly planetary matters like climate stabilization, ocean health, and the advancement of shared knowledge. Each level of governance operates through a participatory democratic processes appropriate to its scale, with representatives accountable to those they represent rather than wielding independent authority. Critically, power flows from local to global rather than being imposed from global to local, and any level can only exercise authority that has been explicitly delegated to it. This nested structure allows extraordinary cultural and political diversity while maintaining cooperation on shared challenges. This approach honors the reality that different human communities have developed diverse ways of organizing themselves, diverse values and priorities, and diverse relationships with their particular landscapes. Rather than attempting to impose a single model everywhere, subsidiarity allows each community to govern itself according to its own wisdom, while participating in larger networks that facilitate mutual aid and shared problem solving. Indigenous peoples can fully govern their territories according to their traditional knowledge and values. Secular and religious communities can organize according to their respective philosophies. Urban and rural areas can adopt different approaches suited to their different contexts. When people feel genuinely empowered to shape their own lives and honor their own cultures, many sources of resentment and conflict dissolve. When governance structures ensure that local communities benefit from the resources of their territories, rather than seeing those resources extracted by distant powers, the material basis for anti-colonial struggles disappears. When diverse governance models coexist and learn from each other rather than competing for dominance, humanity benefits from all our accumulated wisdom rather than losing most of it to cultural homogenization. Restorative justice and healing historical trauma. The fourth essential element for peace is directly addressing the vast store of historical trauma, injustice, and unhealed wounds that perpetuate cycles of violence across generations. Many of today's conflicts have roots in events that occurred decades or centuries ago: colonization, slavery, genocide, land theft, forced displacement, cultural suppression, and countless other violations. When these harms go unacknowledged and unrepaired, they fester across generations, with descendants of perpetrators enjoying ill-gotten advantages while descendants of victims suffer ongoing disadvantages and carry intergenerational trauma. A regenerative approach to peace requires establishing robust restorative justice processes at every scale from local to global. This begins with truth-telling, where historical harms are fully acknowledged by those whose ancestors or nations committed them. Truth commissions document what occurred, who was harmed, and what the continuing consequences are. This process itself begins healing by validating the experiences of victims and their descendants, breaking through the denial and minimization that allows harms to continue festering. Truth-telling must be followed by meaningful reparations that address both material and dignitary harms. For communities whose land was stolen, this means land return or equivalent compensation. For peoples whose labor was exploited, this means wealth redistribution that accounts for accumulated advantages and disadvantages. For cultures that were suppressed, this means resources to revitalize languages, traditions, and knowledge systems. For individuals and communities who suffered direct violence, this means support for healing trauma and rebuilding what was destroyed. Reparations must be accompanied by structural transformation that prevents similar harms from recurring. If colonialism created current inequalities, then post-colonial structures must be dismantled and replaced with genuinely equitable relationships. If racism enabled exploitation, then anti-racist institutions and practices must be established. If patriarchy perpetuated violence against women, then feminist reconstruction of social relations becomes necessary. Apologizing for past harms while maintaining structures that perpetuate them accomplishes nothing meaningful. Equally important is the establishment of widespread trauma healing resources in every community. Historical trauma, personal trauma, and collective trauma all perpetuate violence across generations when left unhealed. People who have experienced trauma without adequate healing often unconsciously reenact that trauma in their relationships and communities. Societies that have experienced collective trauma like war, genocide, or severe oppression develop dysfunctional patterns that persist for generations. Healing requires accessible resources for therapeutic intervention, community dialogue, cultural practices that process collective grief, and the time and safety necessary for genuine recovery. This means training large numbers of people in trauma-informed care, establishing community healing centers, supporting traditional healing practices alongside modern therapeutic approaches, and creating economic conditions that allow people the time and security necessary to engage in healing work. The cost of this infrastructure is far less than the cost of the ongoing violence that results from unhealed trauma. Peace education and relationship building. The fifth essential element for peace is transforming education to actively build the skills, relationships, and mindsets that create peaceful societies rather than merely transmitting academic knowledge. Current education systems in most countries were designed to prepare workers for industrial economies and often reinforce nationalist narratives that view other peoples as competitors or threats. We need instead to design education that teaches children to be skilled practitioners of peace. This begins in early childhood with social-emotional learning that helps children develop empathy, emotional regulation, conflict resolution skills, and the capacity to see situations from multiple perspectives. Children learn through practice how to communicate their needs clearly, listen deeply to others, identify shared interests underlying apparent conflicts, and generate creative solutions that address everyone's needs. These skills become as foundational as literacy and numeracy because they are equally essential to functioning as healthy humans and participating in healthy communities. As children grow, peace education expands to include deep learning about diverse cultures, histories, and worldviews. Rather than learning that one's own culture or nation is superior, children learn that every human culture has developed valuable knowledge and beautiful ways of being in the world. They study history from multiple perspectives, understanding how the same events look different depending on where you stand. They learn about the structural causes of conflict and violence, rather than simplistic narratives of good versus evil. They understand how trauma, inequality, and dehumanization create conditions for violence, and how healing, equity, and recognition of shared humanity create conditions for peace. Critically, peace education includes direct relationship building across differences. Youth exchange programs bring young people from different nations, cultures, religions, and backgrounds together to work on shared projects, particularly ecosystem restoration and community building. When young people work side by side planting forests, building community infrastructure, creating art, or solving problems together, they form genuine friendships and learn firsthand that people everywhere share the same fundamental hopes and needs. These relationships make future conflict far less likely because you cannot easily dehumanize or harm people you have worked alongside and befriended. This international relationship building could be formalized through a youth Earth Corps that functions as a universal service program. Young people from around the world spend 1 or 2 years working on regeneration projects in diverse locations, mixing with peers from many backgrounds while contributing to tangible improvements in environmental and community health. Instead of creating professional militaries trained to see other humans as threats, we create generations of global citizens who have directly experienced the joy of cooperating across differences to heal the world they will inherit. Economic equity and dignified work. The sixth essential element for peace is ensuring genuine economic equity, where all people can meet their needs through dignified work that contributes to collective well-being. Much violence, from interpersonal crime to terrorism to revolution, emerges from the humiliation and desperation of being denied the opportunity to support oneself and one's family, of seeing one's community exploited or degraded, or of experiencing the indignity of enforced dependence on systems that treat you as disposable. Economic equity in a regenerative system means several things simultaneously. First, it means the universal baseline security already discussed, where fundamental needs are guaranteed regardless of one's ability to find formal employment. Second, it means ensuring that valuable work is recognized and compensated fairly rather than the current system where some of the most essential work like caregiving, teaching, and ecosystem restoration is poorly compensated while some of the most harmful work like financial speculation and fossil fuel extraction can generate enormous wealth. Third, it means democratic control over economic institutions through cooperatives and community ownership, rather than concentrating economic power in distant shareholders who extract value while externalizing costs. Fourth, it means redistributing wealth accumulated through historical injustice and ongoing exploitation. The enormous wealth concentrations that exist today did not arise through individual merit or hard work, but through inheritance of stolen land, exploitation of colonized peoples, the appropriation of enslaved labor, the enclosure of commons that once belonged to everyone, and financial manipulation that extracts value without creating it. Redistributing this wealth through progressive taxation, sovereign wealth funds that invest in collective well-being, and direct reparations addresses both historical injustice and current inequality. Fifth, it means ensuring everyone can engage in meaningful work that allows them to develop their capacities, contribute to their communities, and experience the dignity that comes from knowing their efforts matter. In a regenerative economy, there is no shortage of meaningful work because the great task of ecological restoration, community building, care work, education, and creative expression can employ everyone who wishes to contribute. The artificial unemployment created by extractive systems that need to suppress wages by maintaining a desperate reserve labor force disappears when we organize to meet genuine needs rather than maximize profits. When people can meet their needs through dignified work in economies they participate in governing, when they see their children have opportunities for development and flourishing, when their communities are thriving rather than being extracted from, the desperation and humiliation that often drive violence give way to satisfaction and hope. This doesn't eliminate all sources of conflict, but it removes the material deprivation and status anxiety that fuel much violence. Disarmament and conversion to peace infrastructure. The seventh essential element for peace is the progressive disarmament of military systems and the conversion of those resources to peace infrastructure. Globally, governments spend nearly $2 trillion annually on military forces, weapons development, and security systems. This represents an enormous drain on resources that could instead address human needs, a source of technological innovation directed toward destruction rather than flourishing, and a set of institutions whose existence creates pressure to justify them through use. A regenerative approach to security recognizes that true safety comes not from the capacity to threaten violence but from thriving communities, healthy ecosystems, equitable relationships, and robust systems for resolving conflicts without violence. As the other elements of the peace economy are implemented and their benefits become clear, it becomes possible to progressively reduce military forces and redirect those resources toward genuine security. This process must be gradual and reciprocal, with nations reducing military spending in coordination rather than unilaterally. As material scarcity is eliminated, as bioregional interdependence makes conflict economically irrational, as restorative justice heals historical wounds, and as economic equity reduces desperation, the perceived need for large military forces diminishes. Nations can agree to proportional reductions in military spending, with verification systems ensuring compliance and penalties for defection. The resources freed by military reductions are redirected toward peace infrastructure, conflict mediation services, dialogue facilitation training, restorative justice systems, trauma healing programs, youth exchange initiatives, and all the other institutions that actively create the conditions for peace. Rather than spending trillions to maintain the capacity for violence, we invest similar amounts in building the capacity for cooperation. Military research laboratories redirect their talents toward solving problems like clean energy, sustainable food production, water purification, and disease prevention. Weapons manufacturers convert to producing technologies for ecosystem restoration and community building. This conversion demonstrates a profound truth: peace requires infrastructure just as much as war does, but we have habitually invested in the latter while neglecting the former. When we invest in peace infrastructure at the scale we currently invest in military infrastructure, peace becomes far more achievable because we have built the systems that make it possible. Ecological restoration as peace building. The eighth essential element for peace is recognizing that ecological restoration itself functions as powerful peace-building activity. When communities collaborate to restore degraded landscapes, clean polluted waters, regenerate forests, or rebuild soil, several peace-building dynamics occur simultaneously. First, ecological restoration provides concrete shared purpose that transcends political and cultural differences. Regardless of ideology or identity, everyone benefits from clean water, healthy soil, stable climate, and thriving ecosystems. Working together on restoration allows people to build relationships around shared goals rather than focusing on their differences. When former adversaries plant trees together, restore wetlands together, or monitor watershed health together, they develop the trust and mutual understanding that make future conflict less likely. Second, ecological restoration improves material conditions in ways that reduce conflict drivers. As ecosystems recover, they provide more reliable water supplies, more productive agricultural land, more abundant wild foods, more diverse income opportunities, and greater resilience to climate shocks. These improvements reduce scarcity and increase security, addressing root causes of conflict. Communities with healthy ecosystems fight less over resources because they have enough. Third, ecological restoration creates economic opportunities that are inherently cooperative rather than zero-sum. When ecosystems are healthy, they generate benefits for everyone in the landscape rather than requiring that some profit at others' expense. A restored watershed provides clean water to all communities within it. A regenerated forest sequesters carbon that benefits the entire planet while providing sustainable livelihoods to local communities. Healthy soil grows food for local consumption while building fertility for future generations. Fourth, ecological restoration reconnects people to the more than human world in ways that often reduce violence. People who understand themselves as participants in living ecosystems, rather than as separate from nature, develop different values and behaviors. They become more likely to consider long-term consequences, to value cooperation over domination, and to extend moral consideration beyond their immediate in-group. The very act of healing damaged land often contributes to healing the inner wounds that drive human violence. This suggests that massive investment in global ecological restoration should be understood not merely as environmental policy, but as peace policy. International initiatives that bring people together to restore degraded landscapes, particularly in post-conflict regions or across contested boundaries, can help heal divisions while rebuilding the natural systems that support all life. The economic opportunities created by restoration work provide alternatives to joining armed groups or engaging in illegal extraction. The improved ecosystem health reduces resource competition that often triggers or prolongs conflicts. Cultural renaissance and creative expression. The ninth essential element for peace is fostering conditions for cultural renaissance and creative expression to flourish everywhere. Much conflict emerges from the humiliation of cultural suppression, the alienation of communities whose traditional ways of life have been destroyed, and the despair of people who see no beauty or meaning in their lives. Conversely, communities with rich cultural life, opportunities for creative expression, and strong sense of meaning and purpose tend to experience less violence and more cooperation. A regenerative civilization would invest heavily in supporting cultural vitality and creative expression in all their diverse forms. This means providing resources for artists, musicians, storytellers, craftspeople, dancers, and all forms of cultural expression. It means protecting and revitalizing endangered languages and traditional knowledge systems. It means creating spaces where communities can gather for celebration, ritual, and collective meaning-making. It means ensuring everyone has access to education in the arts and opportunities to develop their creative capacities. Cultural expression serves peace in multiple ways. It provides nonviolent outlets for processing difficult emotions and experiences. It creates beauty and meaning that make life worth living even during hardship. It strengthens community bonds through shared participation in cultural practices. It helps preserve traditional ecological knowledge that is essential for sustainability. It enables different cultures to share their wisdom and beauty with each other, building appreciation across differences. Perhaps most importantly, flourishing cultural life creates the conditions where people experience their lives as meaningful and their communities as valuable, reducing the existential despair that sometimes drives people toward violence or extremism. When life is rich with beauty, connection, creativity, and meaning, people have strong reasons to preserve peace rather than risk everything through conflict. Implementation pathway, sequential and synergistic. These elements of the peace economy are deeply interconnected and mutually reinforcing. Universal material security makes people more willing to engage in restorative justice because they're not desperate. Bioregional interdependence makes nations more willing to disarm because cooperation becomes more profitable than conflict. Healing historical trauma makes economic equity more achievable because it reduces resistance from those who benefited from past injustice. Peace education creates generations capable of maintaining the other systems. Ecological restoration provides both the material basis and the cooperative practices for peace. Cultural flourishing gives people reason to maintain peaceful systems. Implementation should therefore proceed on all fronts simultaneously, while recognizing that some elements may be easier to establish in some places than others. Communities and regions can begin implementing these practices immediately without waiting for global consensus. As local and regional successes demonstrate the benefits, the model spreads organically to other areas. Eventually, enough of the world operates on these principles that global coordination becomes feasible. The transition period requires managing the tensions between emerging regenerative systems and existing extractive structures. This means protecting regenerative communities from predatory external forces while demonstrating that their model delivers superior outcomes. It means building regional networks strong enough to resist pressure to conform to extractive patterns. It means using the success of pilot projects to inspire political transformation in mainstream institutions. It means patient work over generations to transform global systems while creating immediate improvements wherever possible. The emergence of lasting peace. As these systems mature and spread, something remarkable emerges. Lasting peace becomes the natural, stable condition rather than a fragile exception requiring constant effort to maintain. This occurs not because humans have fundamentally changed our nature, but because we have organized our systems to align with the cooperative, reciprocal, and generous aspects of human nature rather than the competitive, defensive, and tribal aspects. When everyone's material needs are met, when diverse cultures are honored, when economic relationships are genuinely reciprocal, when historical wounds are healed, when young people build relationships across differences, when work is dignified and fairly compensated, when military systems are replaced with peace infrastructure, when ecological systems are regenerating, and when cultural life is flourishing. Then peace stops being something we strive for and becomes simply how things are. This is not utopian fantasy but practical application of ecological principles to human systems. Rainforests don't maintain peace through enforcement, but by creating conditions where cooperation yields better outcomes than conflict for every organism. We can do the same at civilizational scale. The question is not whether it's possible, but whether we have the wisdom and courage to do the work. The forest civilization, building abundance through trees. Forests as foundation of civilization throughout history. Humans have viewed forests primarily as obstacles to civilization, resources to harvest, or wilderness to conquer. We cleared vast forests for agriculture, logged them for timber and fuel, and celebrated the transformation of wild land into productive fields and cities. This anti-forest bias has been so deeply embedded in our civilizational narrative that we struggle to imagine sophisticated human societies living within rather than in opposition to forests. Yet this imagination is precisely what we need, because forests represent perhaps the most powerful tool available for creating regenerative, biodiverse, harmonious human civilization. Forests are not merely collections of trees, but rather complex living systems that create the conditions for life to flourish. They build soil from rock and air. They capture and purify water, creating the hydrological cycles that make landscapes habitable. They regulate local and regional climate, cooling hot areas and moderating temperature extremes. They sequester vast amounts of carbon, stabilizing global climate. They harbor most of Earth's terrestrial biodiversity, supporting intricate webs of life. They generate oxygen while absorbing pollutants. They prevent erosion and flooding while recharging aquifers. They provide food, medicine, materials, and inspiration. Most remarkably, they do all of this while continuously increasing in complexity, biomass, and productivity over time. A civilization built on forest growing and protection would harness these extraordinary capacities not by extracting from forests until they collapse but by participating in forest ecosystems in ways that enhance their health while meeting human needs. This represents a fundamental reimagining of the human relationship with the more than human world, from domination and extraction to participation and reciprocity. It offers a practical pathway to creating the most regenerative, biodiverse, and harmonious civilization humans have yet achieved. The agroforestry revolution, feeding humanity from forests. The first and most essential transformation is recognizing that forests can feed humanity more abundantly and sustainably than the agricultural systems we currently rely on. Industrial agriculture is fundamentally extractive, depleting soil, exhausting aquifers, eliminating biodiversity, generating pollution, and requiring constant inputs of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides to maintain productivity on degraded land. Meanwhile, healthy forests continuously increase their productivity while building soil, purifying water, supporting biodiversity, and requiring no synthetic inputs. The solution is transitioning from annual monocultures to perennial polycultures organized as food forests that mimic natural forest structure while emphasizing species useful to humans. A mature food forest contains 7 functional layers. The canopy layer consists of large fruit and nut trees like chestnuts, walnuts, pecans, apples, persimmons, and countless other species adapted to local climates. These trees live for decades or centuries, requiring minimal maintenance once established while producing abundant harvests annually. The subcanopy layer includes smaller fruit trees and large shrubs like plums, peaches, figs, mulberries, and hazelnuts. The shrub layer provides berries from species like blueberries, currants, gooseberries, and elderberries along with other useful plants. The herbaceous layer contains perennial vegetables, herbs, and medicinal plants that regrow year after year without replanting. Species like asparagus, rhubarb, artichokes, perennial onions, and countless traditional vegetables thrive in forest understory conditions. The ground cover layer consists of edible plants that spread to protect soil, like strawberries, low bush blueberries, and various edible ground covers. The rhizosphere layer includes root crops from perennial species like groundnuts, sunchokes, and various traditional tubers. The vertical layer consists of climbing plants like grapes, kiwis, hops, and various beans that use trees as living trellises. This 7-layer structure captures solar energy and produces food throughout the vertical profile, rather than only at ground level like conventional agriculture. It mimics natural forest structure while emphasizing species useful to humans, creating systems that produce far more food per acre than industrial monocultures while continuously improving soil, supporting biodiversity, purifying water, and sequestering carbon. Studies of mature food forests show they can produce 5 to 10 times more calories per acre than conventional agriculture, while requiring a fraction of the labor, no synthetic inputs, and no soil degradation. Food forests also provide nutrition that industrial agriculture cannot match. The diversity of species in a food forest means diverse nutrients, diverse flavors, and resilience to pest and weather fluctuations. When one crop fails due to late frost or pest pressure, dozens of others continue producing. The perennial nature means no vulnerable period when annual crops are establishing, providing year-round food security. The deep roots of trees access nutrients and water far below the reach of annual crops, making food forests resilient to drought while building topsoil. Establishing food forests on a civilizational scale means transitioning millions of acres currently in extractive annual agriculture to regenerative perennial systems. This transition can occur gradually as existing orchards are diversified into multi-layer food forests, as degraded agricultural land is restored through staged planting of food forest species, and as new food forests are established on land unsuitable for annual crops. Within 2 to 3 decades, these systems reach peak productivity and can continue producing abundantly for centuries with minimal maintenance. Forest villages, human settlements within living systems. The second major transformation is redesigning human settlements to exist within forests rather than replacing them. Current urban and suburban development eliminates existing ecosystems, covering land with impermeable surfaces that create dead zones requiring constant external inputs of water, food, energy, and materials while generating pollution and waste. We can instead design settlements as components of living forest ecosystems that contribute to rather than degrade the landscapes they inhabit. Forest villages are designed with forest as the dominant feature, with human structures integrated into the canopy rather than clearing land for conventional development. Buildings are distributed throughout the forest, connected by walking paths under canopy cover. Structures are designed with green roofs and living walls that integrate with surrounding vegetation, creating continuity of habitat rather than hard boundaries between built and natural environments. Natural ventilation and passive solar design minimize energy needs. Rainwater is captured and stored in ways that enhance rather than disrupt local hydrology. Waste is composted and returned to soil. Greywater is purified through constructed wetlands. The food forests surrounding and interspersed with dwellings provide most nutrition locally, with walking distance access to diverse harvests throughout the year. Community gathering spaces are clearings within the forest designed for meetings, celebrations, markets, and shared activities. Children grow up climbing trees, swimming in streams, learning to identify hundreds of plant and animal species, and understanding themselves as participants in living ecosystems. Elders share knowledge of the forest while tending medicinal plant gardens and passing on traditional ecological wisdom. Forest villages maintain population densities appropriate to local ecological capacity, typically supporting a few hundred to a few thousand people per village depending on forest productivity and available land. This human scale enables genuine democracy and social cohesion while preventing the anonymity and alienation of megacities. Villages connect with others in their bioregion through networks that facilitate trade, knowledge sharing, and mutual support while maintaining local autonomy. The buildings themselves use timber harvested sustainably from managed forest areas, where selective cutting maintains forest structure while providing materials. Rather than clear-cutting, selective harvesting removes individual mature trees while leaving the forest canopy intact, allowing regeneration while providing continuous supplies of high-quality timber. Other building materials come from fast-growing bamboo, cob made from local clay and straw, or compressed earth blocks, all with minimal processing and minimal environmental impact. Energy comes primarily from solar panels integrated into green roofs and building facades, supplemented by small-scale wind where appropriate and biomass from forest thinnings used in high-efficiency heating systems. The distributed nature of forest villages suits distributed renewable energy perfectly, avoiding the transmission losses and infrastructure costs of centralized power generation. Energy needs are minimized through passive design, shared facilities, and lifestyles that prioritize sufficiency over excess consumption. Watershed restoration through strategic reforestation. The third major transformation is using strategic reforestation to restore hydrological cycles, prevent flooding and drought, recharge aquifers, and purify water at landscape scale. Forests are the most effective technology humans possess for managing water because they slow rainfall, allowing infiltration rather than runoff. They transpire vast quantities of water back into the atmosphere, creating local precipitation cycles. They filter pollutants and sediments, purifying water naturally. Their roots hold soil on slopes, preventing erosion that fills waterways with sediments. Watershed restoration begins by identifying degraded areas where forest loss has disrupted hydrological function. These typically include deforested slopes where erosion gullies now channel rainfall rapidly downhill, creating downstream flooding while depleting upland water availability. They include riparian zones along streams where forest clearing has caused bank collapse, water temperature increases, and loss of aquatic habitat. They include areas where groundwater tables have dropped due to excessive pumping combined with reduced forest cover that once facilitated recharge. Restoration proceeds by establishing appropriate forest species in these strategic locations. On steep slopes, fast-growing pioneer species are planted densely to quickly establish canopy cover that protects soil and slows water movement. These pioneers create conditions for slower-growing climax species that eventually replace them, creating forest succession that builds ecosystem complexity over decades. Along streams, riparian forests are established with species adapted to periodic flooding, creating shaded stream corridors that moderate water temperature, provide organic matter for aquatic food webs, and stabilize banks with extensive root systems. In areas needing aquifer recharge, forests are established over recharge zones where geological formations allow surface water to percolate deep underground. The forest canopy slows rainfall while the deep roots create channels that facilitate infiltration. Over time, these restored forests raise water tables, replenishing wells and springs that serve both human communities and wildlife. The impacts of watershed-scale reforestation can be dramatic. Studies show that reforesting as little as 30% of a degraded watershed can reduce downstream flooding by half while increasing dry season stream flows. Water quality improves measurably as forests filter sediments and break down pollutants. Local rainfall patterns often shift as restored forests create precipitation through transpiration. These benefits accumulate over decades as forests mature and their hydrological functions intensify. Climate stabilization through massive reforestation. The fourth major transformation is recognizing forests as our most powerful and scalable technology for drawing down atmospheric carbon and stabilizing global climate. Forests currently sequester roughly one-third of human carbon emissions annually, and this capacity can be dramatically expanded through strategic reforestation of degraded lands worldwide. Studies suggest that restoring forests on degraded lands globally could sequester 200 billion tons of carbon, roughly equivalent to 20 years of current emissions. This reforestation must be carefully designed to maximize climate benefits while supporting biodiversity and human well-being. Native species adapted to local conditions are always preferred because they support local wildlife, require no maintenance once established, and form stable ecosystems that persist indefinitely. Mixed species forests sequester more carbon than monocultures because different species occupy different niches, capturing more total solar energy and producing more total biomass. They are also more resilient to pests, diseases, and climate fluctuations. Forest types are matched to their locations based on ecology rather than arbitrary human preferences. Tropical rainforests, which grow year-round and support extraordinary biodiversity, are established in tropical regions on degraded land currently used for low-productivity cattle ranching or failed industrial agriculture. Temperate deciduous and mixed forests are established across mid-latitude regions, where vast areas were historically forested but are now degraded agricultural land or abandoned industrial sites. Boreal forests are encouraged to expand where warming conditions make higher latitudes suitable for trees. Crucially, these are not plantations but diverse forests that emphasize native species, mixed stage structure, and natural regeneration. Plantations of single species and rows might sequester carbon quickly in their early years, but they crash periodically due to disease or pests, are vulnerable to climate fluctuations, support minimal biodiversity, and often prevent natural forest regeneration. True restoration creates forests that become increasingly robust over time, sequestering more carbon as they mature while providing all the other ecological services healthy forests offer. The carbon sequestration potential of forests extends beyond the trees themselves. Forest soils contain more carbon than the atmosphere and all vegetation combined, and healthy forests continuously build soil carbon through the accumulation of organic matter from falling leaves, dying roots, and the vast fungal networks that connect trees. Protecting existing forests and restoring degraded forests therefore protects and expands this massive terrestrial carbon sink. Biodiversity conservation through habitat connectivity. The fifth major transformation is using forest restoration to create connected habitat networks that support the movement and genetic exchange necessary for wildlife populations to remain viable in a changing climate. Currently, many protected natural areas exist as isolated islands surrounded by agricultural or urban development, preventing animal movement between populations and limiting genetic diversity. As climate shifts, many species need to move to track suitable conditions, but they cannot cross the hostile matrix of human-dominated landscapes. The solution is establishing forest corridors that connect existing habitat patches, creating landscape-scale networks where wildlife can move freely. These corridors can be surprisingly narrow in some cases. A few hundred meters of forest along a stream can allow many species to move between larger habitat blocks. In other cases, wider corridors of several kilometers are necessary for species with large home ranges or those requiring interior forest conditions. Forest corridors serve multiple functions simultaneously. They provide movement routes for wildlife while also functioning as riparian buffers that protect water quality, as windbreaks that moderate agricultural microclimates, as sources of timber and non-timber forest products for human communities, and as recreational areas for hiking and wildlife observation. This multifunctionality makes corridors economically viable even in landscapes where land cost might seem to prohibit conservation. Corridor design considers the needs of multiple species rather than optimizing for any single species. A corridor designed to facilitate jaguar movement through Central American landscapes also serves howler monkeys, toucans, and countless other species. A corridor connecting tiger populations in India provides habitat for elephants, dholes, and hundreds of bird species. This multi-species approach creates resilient habitat networks rather than fragile single-species solutions. As climate changes, these corridor networks become even more essential. Species that currently thrive in one area may need to shift their ranges hundreds of kilometers toward the poles or up mountain slopes to remain in suitable climatic conditions. Without connected habitat, they cannot make these movements and face local extinction. With habitat corridors providing pathways, species can track suitable conditions across landscapes, maintaining viable populations through climate transitions. The establishment of global habitat corridor networks represents one of the most important conservation strategies for maintaining biodiversity through the coming centuries. Projects like the Yellowstone to Yukon corridor in North America, which aims to connect protected areas across 3,000 kilometers, demonstrate that ambitious landscape-scale conservation is feasible when conservation, ranching, forestry, and indigenous communities work together. Forest-based economies, prosperity through stewardship. The sixth major transformation is developing economic systems that generate prosperity through forest stewardship rather than forest destruction. Current economic incentives often reward deforestation through short-term gains from timber sales, conversion to agriculture, or development, while providing no compensation for the immense value of standing forests. We need economic systems that make forest protection and restoration more profitable than forest destruction. This begins with recognizing and monetizing the ecosystem services that forests provide. Carbon sequestration can generate revenue through carbon markets where entities that reduce or sequester carbon earn credits that can be sold to entities needing to offset emissions. A well-designed global carbon market could direct billions of dollars annually to forest protection and restoration, making stewardship economically rational. Water services can be monetized through payments for watershed services where downstream water users pay upstream landowners to maintain forest cover that ensures water quality and quantity. Biodiversity conservation can be supported through conservation payments, where governments or international bodies pay landowners to maintain habitat for threatened species. Ecotourism can generate substantial revenue in areas with charismatic wildlife or extraordinary natural beauty, creating economic incentives to maintain forests in pristine condition. Each of these mechanisms transforms forests from inert resources with value only when destroyed to productive assets that generate continuous revenue through their existence and health. Beyond ecosystem service payments, forests provide diverse products that can be harvested sustainably while maintaining forest structure and function. Selective timber harvesting removes individual mature trees on long rotation cycles, providing high-quality wood products while maintaining forest canopy and supporting biodiversity. Non-timber forest products including medicinal plants, edible mushrooms, wild fruits and nuts, fibers, dyes, and countless other materials can provide significant income when harvested sustainably. Agroforestry systems that integrate crops with forest trees generate higher returns per hectare than either conventional agriculture or forestry alone, while providing all the ecological benefits of forest cover. Silvopasture systems that integrate livestock grazing with forest trees provide meat, dairy, and timber while supporting biodiversity and building soil in ways that conventional grazing cannot achieve. These integrated systems demonstrate that human food and material production need not displace forests but can occur within forested landscapes. Forest-based economies also support diverse livelihoods that strengthen rural communities. Rather than concentrating wealth in industrial forestry operations that extract timber and ship jobs elsewhere, community-based forest management distributes economic benefits to local populations. Forest monitoring, restoration work, sustainable harvesting of forest products, ecotourism guiding, and forest-based craft production all provide meaningful employment while strengthening the connection between communities and their forest landscapes. Indigenous leadership and traditional ecological knowledge. The seventh major transformation is recognizing indigenous peoples as essential leaders in forest conservation and restoration. Acknowledging that indigenous territories contain some of the world's healthiest forests precisely because indigenous communities have maintained sustainable relationships with forest ecosystems for thousands of years. Studies consistently show that forests in indigenous territories have lower deforestation rates, higher biodiversity, and better ecological integrity than even supposedly protected areas managed by governments. This success reflects sophisticated traditional ecological knowledge developed over countless generations of intimate relationship with particular landscapes. Indigenous peoples understand forest ecology in ways that complement scientific knowledge, recognizing patterns and relationships that might take scientists decades to discover. They possess deep knowledge of useful plant species, seasonal patterns, wildlife behavior, fire management, and countless other aspects of forest ecology essential for successful restoration and stewardship. A forest civilization must therefore place indigenous peoples at the center of forest governance and management, rather than marginalizing them as conservation obstacles. This means fully recognizing indigenous land rights, providing resources for indigenous communities to manage their territories according to their traditional practices, creating formal roles for indigenous knowledge holders in forest policy making, and learning from indigenous wisdom about sustainable forest relationships. Critically, this is not merely about fairness or historical justice, though those are important. It is pragmatic recognition that indigenous communities have already solved the problem of living sustainably within forests, and learning from their success is more efficient than attempting to develop entirely new approaches. Their knowledge about which plants are edible, which are medicinal, how to use fire to maintain forest health, how to harvest sustainably, and countless other practical matters represents millennia of accumulated wisdom that cannot be recreated quickly. Indigenous leadership also brings different values and priorities than market-based or scientific approaches alone. Indigenous worldviews typically recognize forests and their inhabitants as relatives deserving respect and reciprocity, rather than as resources to exploit. This relational approach often leads to more sustainable management than treating forests as commodities. The combination of indigenous values, traditional ecological knowledge, and modern scientific understanding creates more robust and effective forest stewardship than any single approach alone. Urban reforestation, greening cities. The eighth major transformation is bringing forests into cities, rather than treating urban and natural areas as separate zones. Most humans now live in cities, and that proportion will likely increase. If cities remain concrete wastelands hostile to life, then most humans will grow up disconnected from nature, making it difficult to develop the understanding and commitment necessary to create a forest civilization. Conversely, if cities themselves become forested, then most humans grow up within healthy ecosystems, developing intuitive understanding of ecological relationships. Urban forestry at civilizational scale means transforming cities into multi-layered ecosystems where trees and forest understory plants are integrated throughout urban fabric. Streets become forest corridors with continuous canopy. Parks become genuine forest fragments supporting diverse wildlife. Building facades and roofs support living walls and gardens. Vacant lots transform into community food forests. Streams previously confined to culverts are daylighted and restored with riparian forests. The city itself becomes habitat rather than merely containing isolated green spaces. This urban reforestation provides multiple benefits simultaneously. Trees cool cities through evapotranspiration and shade, reducing the urban heat island effects that make cities significantly hotter than surrounding areas. Trees filter air pollution, improving respiratory health for residents. They reduce stormwater runoff, preventing flooding while recharging groundwater. They provide habitat for birds, insects, and other urban wildlife, maintaining biodiversity even in dense cities. They produce food through urban orchards and food forests, improving food security and nutrition. Perhaps most importantly, urban forests reconnect urban residents with living systems, breaking the psychological separation between humans and nature that characterizes modern industrial civilization. Children who climb trees in their neighborhood, harvest fruit from community orchards, watch birds nesting outside their windows, and play in forested parks develop very different environmental values than children growing up in purely built environments. Adults who walk to work under forest canopy, tend community gardens, and participate in urban forest restoration develop deeper understanding of ecological relationships. Urban reforestation requires reimagining urban design from the ground up. Rather than maximizing impermeable surface and concentrating vegetation in isolated parks, forest cities prioritize permeable surfaces, distributed green infrastructure, and integration of vegetation throughout all urban spaces. This means narrower streets with canopy cover, more walking and cycling paths through green corridors, buildings designed to support living walls and green roofs, and zoning that requires rather than merely allows vegetation. The transformation of existing cities occurs gradually through strategic interventions. Street trees are planted in continuous rows with connected soil volumes rather than isolated tree pits, allowing root systems to share resources and support larger, healthier trees. Streams are restored and daylighted with riparian forest buffers. Vacant lots are transformed into community food forests. Building renovations incorporate green roofs and walls. Over decades, the cumulative effect transforms cities from hostile concrete environments into thriving forest ecosystems that happen to include human habitation. Education in and about forests. The ninth major transformation is restructuring education to occur primarily within forests and to focus on developing deep ecological literacy. Current education systems sequester children in buildings for most of their childhood, teaching primarily abstract academic knowledge with minimal connection to living systems. We need instead to design education where children spend significant time in forests, learning through direct observation and participation in ecosystem processes. Forest schools, which have become popular in parts of Europe, demonstrate that children can learn everything currently taught in conventional classrooms while spending most of their time outdoors in forests. Academic subjects are taught in context through direct experience. Mathematics is learned through measuring trees, calculating forest growth rates, and analyzing ecosystem relationships. Science is learned through observing wildlife, conducting forest inventories, monitoring stream health, and participating in restoration projects. Language skills develop through nature journaling, creating field guides, and telling stories about forest experiences. Children also learn practical skills increasingly absent from conventional education. They learn to identify hundreds of plant and animal species, understanding ecological relationships through direct observation. They learn to forage for wild food safely and sustainably. They develop physical competence through climbing trees, navigating rough terrain, and engaging in unstructured outdoor play. They learn to assess and manage risk appropriately, developing confidence and autonomy. Most importantly, they develop a direct relationship with forests and ecological systems that makes sustainability intuitive rather than abstract. This forest-based education continues through adolescence and adulthood. Apprenticeships in forest-based livelihoods like sustainable forestry, agroforestry, forest restoration, wildlife monitoring, and traditional crafts provide practical training while maintaining connection to forest landscapes. Universities and research stations located within forests conduct long-term ecological studies while training the next generation of forest scientists and practitioners. Elder programs ensure traditional ecological knowledge is passed to younger generations through direct mentorship in forest settings. The cumulative effect of forest-based education is creating populations with deep ecological literacy who understand themselves as participants in forest ecosystems rather than as separate from nature. This understanding becomes the foundation for maintaining a forest civilization across generations, as each generation grows up valuing and knowing how to sustain the forest systems their lives depend on. Global Forest Network, Planetary Restoration. The 10th and final transformation is coordinating local and regional forest initiatives into a global network working toward planetary-scale forest restoration. While forest projects must be locally rooted and bioregionally appropriate, coordination at larger scales facilitates knowledge sharing, resource distribution, and addressing challenges that transcend local boundaries. This global forest network would function as a distributed cooperative where projects worldwide share what they learn about forest restoration techniques, agroforestry designs, community forest management, and countless other practical matters. A project in Indonesia discovering effective methods for restoring tropical peat forest shares that knowledge with projects in the Amazon and Congo basin facing similar challenges. an initiative in India developing innovative silvopasture system shares designs with groups in Africa and Latin America. An effort in Europe creating wildlife corridor shares strategies with North American projects working towards similar goals. The network also facilitates resource flows, directing funding, materials, and expertise to where they can have greatest impact. Regions with successful restoration projects and accumulated expertise provide training and consultation to regions just beginning restoration work. Communities with surplus seedlings or seeds share with communities needing planting materials. Research institutions with advanced monitoring technologies support projects in remote areas lacking those resources. Global coordination addresses challenges requiring planetary cooperation, particularly climate stabilization and biodiversity conservation. Climate modeling helps identify priority areas for reforestation that would have maximum impact on stabilizing climate. Biodiversity assessments guide habitat corridor placement to maintain genetic connectivity between populations. International agreements ensure forests are valued appropriately and that ecosystem service payments flow from those benefiting from forests to those stewarding them. This global network operates on principles of subsidiarity, with local autonomy and implementation while maintaining coordination at larger scales. Local communities decide what to plant, how to manage their forests, and how to organize forest-based economies. Bioregional networks coordinate across watersheds and ecosystems. National and international bodies facilitate large-scale coordination, resource distribution, and policy harmonization. The structure mirrors the nested cooperative architecture described earlier, with power flowing from local to global rather than being imposed from above. The emergence of forest civilization. As these 10 transformations proceed and mature, something remarkable emerges, a truly regenerative civilization where human prosperity and ecosystem health reinforce each other in upward spirals. Forests expand as degraded lands are restored and agricultural systems transition to agroforestry. As forests expand, they sequester carbon, purify water, support biodiversity, prevent flooding and drought, and create the stable climate conditions necessary for long-term human well-being. Forest-based economies provide diverse livelihoods while maintaining forest health. Human settlements integrated into forest function as components of living ecosystems rather than as separate from nature. Children grow up within forests, developing deep ecological literacy and understanding themselves as participants in the community of life. This understanding shapes their choices as adults, creating societies that value and maintain forest systems. The forests they tend provide everything needed for prosperous lives: food, materials, clean water, stable climate, beauty, inspiration, and connection to the more than human world. This forest civilization represents not a return to primitive conditions, but rather a sophisticated integration of traditional wisdom, modern scientific understanding, and appropriate technology in service of life. It harnesses humanity's unprecedented knowledge and capabilities to heal rather than harm, to cooperate with rather than dominate, to participate in rather than separate from the living systems that sustain all existence. The transition requires work across generations, but each step improves well-being immediately while setting the stage for further progress. A community establishing food forests improves nutrition and food security within a few years, while creating systems that will produce abundantly for centuries. A region restoring watershed forests experiences improved water quality and reduced flooding within a decade, while creating habitat that supports biodiversity indefinitely. A society transitioning to forest-based economies provides meaningful livelihoods while ensuring forests expand and thrive. The question is not whether this transformation is possible, since we know forests work and we have examples of sustainable forest civilizations from indigenous peoples worldwide. The question is whether we have the wisdom to learn from these examples and the courage to reorganize our societies accordingly before further ecological degradation forecloses the option. Forests offer abundant life, stability, beauty, and prosperity. We need only accept their invitation.